Semantic infiltration is a psychological tactic that seeps into your mind long before you ever realize it's there. It's the deliberate use of someone's own language, values, or terminology to slowly shift their beliefs, redefine their boundaries, and alter their reality, all without confrontation. When someone uses the exact words you use to describe your world, it feels familiar, safe, even validating. But this comfort is the trap. Through semantic infiltration, manipulators hijack your internal dictionary and slowly begin to rewrite the meaning behind your values. Semantic infiltration. Imagine a manipulator who knows you value freedom. They begin to use the word in ways that benefit them. True freedom means trusting me, or if you really believe in freedom, you wouldn't question this. Over time, your own vocabulary is weaponized against you. Words you once held close begin to shift in definition, in function, and in emotional charge. Suddenly, freedom isn't something you choose, it's something that's granted when you comply. This technique is especially dangerous because it hides in plain sight. You feel heard, you feel seen, you feel aligned, but what's happening is subtle linguistic invasion. The manipulator's values cloak themselves in your own words, bypassing your defenses. By using your language, they create the illusion of shared values, while slowly dismantling your ability to think independently. It's used in politics, cults, toxic relationships, and high-stakes negotiations. It makes manipulation feel like understanding, and once your words are no longer yours, your thoughts follow. You won't notice the shift until the damage is done, and by then, you've already agreed. Expectation implanting. Expectation implanting is the subtle art of programming someone's mind to anticipate a specific outcome, so powerfully, so vividly, that they unconsciously work to fulfill it themselves. This tactic doesn't control with force, it controls with suggestion. It seeds an idea, a possibility, a future that feels so real, it begins to steer behavior, emotions, and decisions, all without the target realizing they've been led. A manipulator might say, "You've always been the kind of person who does the right thing," or "I know you're not someone who would back out after committing." At first, these sound like compliments, but they're not. They're instructions. They're psychological traps disguised as praise. The moment you internalize that expectation, you begin to live up to it, whether it serves you or not. What makes this tactic so devastating is how it exploits our need for identity and consistency. Once a label is placed on us, we're driven to embody it, even when it contradicts our own best interests. Expectation implanting turns your own ego into a leash. You become so focused on proving the manipulator right or avoiding proving them wrong that you lose the ability to choose freely. Parents do it, bosses do it, lovers do it, sometimes without knowing, but the skilled manipulator does it with precision, whispering futures into your mind until you start walking toward them on your own. The implanted expectation doesn't need to be true, it only needs to be believed, and once it's believed, it becomes prophecy, not because it was real, but because you made it real. Reality shifting. Reality shifting is a psychological tactic that doesn't just change your thoughts, it warps the entire framework you use to understand the world. It's the slow, deliberate process of altering someone's perception of what is normal, acceptable, or true until they're standing in a reality constructed entirely by the manipulator. The scariest part, it often feels like it's happening naturally, like you're evolving, when in fact, you're being dismantled from the inside out. A manipulator begins by planting subtle contradictions. What was once unacceptable becomes not that bad. What felt unfair becomes understandable. You start compromising in small ways, excusing their behavior, downplaying your gut feelings, adjusting your standards. And with every compromise, your original worldview fades. You stop asking if something is right or wrong. You ask if it's expected. Reality shifting doesn't happen in one big moment. It happens in fragments. A joke that crosses a line, a rule that no longer applies, a truth that's suddenly misunderstood. Each crack is tiny, barely worth noticing, but over time, the cracks connect, and the life you once trusted begins to blur. This tactic thrives in abusive relationships, authoritarian groups, and toxic work environments. It's why victims often say, "I don't know how I got here," because they didn't leap into hell, they were gently guided. The power of reality shifting lies in its invisibility. It doesn't feel like you're being controlled, it feels like you're adapting, but what you're really doing is surrendering, bit by bit, until the only reality you recognize is the one they handed you. Microvalidation. Microvalidation is one of the most deceptively gentle manipulation tactics. It doesn't break you down with cruelty. It builds you up just enough to keep you hooked. It's the calculated use of small, precise affirmations designed to reward specific behaviors that serve the manipulator's agenda. Unlike full-blown praise, microvalidation is subtle, almost invisible, but its impact is deeply psychological, tapping into the primal need for approval, recognition, and belonging. It might be a soft nod when you agree with their opinion, a casual, "That's a good point," when you side with them in a group, a rare smile when you let your guard down in just the way they want. These tiny validations trigger dopamine. Your brain lights up. You feel seen, valuable even, but only when you behave in ways they approve of. That's the trap. Over time, you begin to crave those micro moments of recognition, and to get them, you slowly adjust. You echo their views. You filter your thoughts. You shrink the parts of yourself they don't validate and amplify the ones they reward. You don't even realize you're being conditioned. It feels like you're becoming more aligned, more liked, more understood, but really, you're being sculpted. Microvalidation turns manipulation into a reward system. You're not told what to do. You're subtly trained what to become. It works especially well on people who are empathetic, approval-seeking, or uncertain. And by the time you recognize the pattern, you've often reshaped your identity to fit their mold. It's not the words they say that control you. It's the tiny ones they choose not to. Preemptive deflection. Preemptive deflection is a sinister psychological maneuver where the manipulator strikes first, not with force, but with suspicion. It's the tactic of accusing others of manipulation, dishonesty, or hidden motives before anyone has a chance to question theirs. The brilliance of this move lies in how it reroutes blame. The moment they plant that accusation, the spotlight shifts away from them and onto you. Imagine someone constantly hinting that you're overthinking, too sensitive, or even trying to control them. At first, it sounds defensive or even insecure, but then you realize something deeper is happening. They've constructed a psychological force field around themselves. By claiming victimhood or suspicion before you've even reacted, they strip you of the power to respond. If you push back, you're proving them right. If you stay silent, you've accepted the guilt. Preemptive deflection creates a mind trap. It forces you into defensiveness before you've made a move. You start second-guessing your feelings. You tiptoe around confrontation. You become hesitant to assert your boundaries. After all, you've already been framed as the aggressor. It's especially potent in toxic relationships where the manipulator is skilled at playing both victim and sage. They'll say things like, "I hope you're not just trying to guilt trip me," or "You always twist things," before you've said a word. That's not a reaction. That's control. This tactic doesn't block your accusations. It prevents them. And in doing so, it keeps the manipulator above suspicion. You're too busy defending your character to notice they've just slipped out of accountability. Reverse projection. Reverse projection is a deeply insidious psychological tactic where a manipulator attributes their own toxic thoughts, motives, or behaviors to you before you even realize what they're doing. It's a mental sleight of hand that not only shields them from suspicion, but also transfers guilt, confusion, and defensiveness onto you. You become the villain in their story, the one with the bad intentions, the one who's irrational, selfish, or controlling, all while they wear the mask of innocence. It begins with a calculated accusation, "You're trying to manipulate me," or "You're only being nice because you want something." These claims sting. You pause, you question yourself. Suddenly, you're on the defensive, trying to prove a purity of intent you weren't even thinking about until now, and while you're explaining yourself, the real manipulator escapes scrutiny. This tactic is brutally effective because it exploits your empathy. You don't want to be hurtful, you don't want to be seen as manipulative. So you go inward, analyze your words, your tone, your actions, wondering if maybe, somehow, you were in the wrong. That pause of self-doubt is exactly what they need to tighten their grip. Reverse projection creates emotional whiplash. It destabilizes you. It makes you internalize blame while they walk away clean. In arguments, it flips the power dynamic. In relationships, it rewrites the narrative. It makes you responsible for their darkness and grateful when they forgive you for it. Over time, you lose sight of what's real because you've been taught that your own instincts are the problem and theirs never up for question. Compliance saturation. Compliance saturation is the quiet erosion of your willpower through relentless, seemingly harmless requests. It doesn't rely on authority or aggression. It relies on exhaustion. It begins with small, innocent favors. "Can you grab that for me? Mind sending this email? Would you take care of this one thing real quick?" You say yes because it's easy, because it feels good to help, because it's no big deal, but it never stops at one. The manipulator floods you with these low-effort asks until your brain normalizes the act of saying yes. You become conditioned to obey without resistance, without thinking. It doesn't feel like submission. It feels like rhythm. But what's really happening is a slow overwrite of your default response. You stop weighing your own needs. You stop asking if you even want to comply. You just do. Over time, the asks escalate. Slightly longer tasks, slightly more personal, a favor that makes you uncomfortable, a commitment you didn't agree to, but by then, your compliance reflex has already been trained and your silence becomes your consent. This tactic is brutally effective on kind, accommodating people, people who hate conflict, people who feel guilty saying no. The manipulator sees this and exploits it like a system, because once you've said yes 100 times, saying no feels like betrayal. Compliance saturation isn't about the favors, it's about the pattern. It's about reshaping your instinct. It's about smothering your resistance under the weight of tiny obligations until you forget that you ever had a choice. Mirror touch, neuro-linguistic syncing. Mirror touch neuro-linguistic syncing is a powerful and haunting manipulation technique that fuses body language, subtle mimicry, and linguistic alignment into one seamless psychological spell. It's not just about copying someone's gestures. It's about syncing your entire presence to their nervous system until their brain reads you as familiar, safe, and eerily right. This isn't rapport. This is neural possession. It begins with mirror touch, the unconscious tendency humans have to respond emotionally when they see someone being touched or moving in certain ways. A manipulator doesn't just mimic posture. They breathe when you breathe, shift when you shift, match your energy, and reflect your emotional cadence like a psychic echo. Then comes the neuro-linguistic layer. They mirror your speech patterns, sentence structure, even word choices. You say, "That really hit me hard," and moments later, they say, "Yeah, it hit me hard too." It sounds like connection. It's actually behavioral puppeteering. The human brain is built to trust what feels like us. Mirror touch syncing hijacks that instinct. You start to feel an inexplicable closeness, a pull, a sense that this person just gets you. But they don't. They're performing you back to yourself, and every time you feel seen, they deepen their control. Used by seducers, con artists, and high-level manipulators, this tactic bypasses logic and hits the subconscious directly. You trust them without knowing why. You bond without justification, and the deeper the sink, the harder it is to walk away, because by then, their rhythm is your rhythm, their words, your thoughts, their presence, your mirror. Selective amnesia prompting. Selective amnesia prompting is a psychological manipulation tactic designed to make someone forget, not the memory itself, but the weight of it. It's the art of subtly guiding a person away from details, emotions, or events that threaten the manipulator's control. This isn't about shouting over truth, it's about making the truth feel foggy, irrelevant, or not how it really happened. And it works, not because the memory disappears, but because the victim begins to doubt its importance. A manipulator using this tactic might say, "I don't think that's how it went," or "You always remember things so dramatically." These statements aren't attacks, they're suggestions. Suggestions that the event wasn't serious, that your emotions were exaggerated, that your memory can't be trusted, and when repeated over time, these tiny doubts become mental rot, eating away at your certainty, your confidence, your clarity. Selective amnesia prompting doesn't erase, it erodes. It works best in situations where emotions ran high, where the details are already fragile. Arguments, betrayals, subtle abuses. The manipulator rewrites those moments in real time, reframing them as misunderstandings, jokes, or your own projections. You begin to hesitate when you recall them. You second-guess your instincts. You start saying things like, "Maybe I overreacted," or "I don't know, maybe I'm remembering it wrong." That's the victory. Once you no longer trust your version of reality, theirs becomes the default. They don't need to lie. They just need you to forget how much the truth once mattered. And once that happens, they can do it again and again without resistance. Ethical dissonance. Ethical dissonance is a dark psychological tactic that doesn't attack your morals head-on. It erodes them from within. It's the calculated manipulation of your internal value system, creating subtle contradictions between what you believe and what you're led to do. The result is emotional confusion, self-betrayal, and a deep vulnerability to further control. You don't feel force, you feel conflicted, and that's exactly the point. It begins with small compromises. You believe in honesty, but they convince you to keep a harmless secret. You pride yourself on kindness, but they push you to ignore someone else's pain for the greater good. Each shift seems minor, rational, even justified, but underneath, your mind starts to fracture. You begin to experience cognitive discomfort, a low, simmering unease that grows stronger the further you drift from your principles. A skilled manipulator recognizes this tension and weaponizes it. They use your discomfort as proof that you're the problem. "Why are you so dramatic?" You're just too sensitive. Over time, your compass spins. You stop trusting your gut. You start seeking their approval to validate right and wrong. The more ethical dissonance you feel, the more you lean on them to quiet it. This tactic is often used in abusive relationships, toxic workplaces, and cult dynamics. It doesn't just control what you do, it makes you question who you are. It turns your own morality into a battlefield where every step forward feels like a betrayal of something sacred. And by the time you realize how far you've drifted, you're already living by someone else's code. Not because you wanted to, but because they rewrote yours. Layered truths. Layered truths is a manipulative technique that weaves deception into honesty so seamlessly that it becomes nearly impossible to untangle one from the other. It's the tactic of telling partial truths, just enough to earn your trust, while burying lies underneath the comforting surface of authenticity. It's not the lie that traps you, it's the truth wrapped around it. The manipulator starts with something real, a personal story, a shared value, a confession that feels raw and vulnerable. It disarms you. You let your guard down because you recognize sincerity, or at least what feels like it. But then comes the twist, a single fact omitted, a key motive hidden, a context warped. The truth seduces you, but the lie drives the outcome. This tactic thrives on emotional resonance. When someone shares something painful, brave, or self-critical, you want to believe them. You feel bonded, connected. So when they slip in a justification, why they had no choice or how things weren't that simple, you're already on their side. You defend them, even when the full story would tell a very different tale. Layered truths weaponize your empathy. They prey on your need to make sense of contradiction. You keep trying to reconcile what you know with what they've told you, but it doesn't quite add up. Still, you hesitate to call it a lie, because it wasn't. Not fully. That's what makes this tactic so destructive. It leaves you stuck in limbo, trusting half of what you shouldn't and doubting half of what you should. And in that confusion, the manipulator remains untouchable. False altruism. False altruism is one of the most emotionally manipulative tactics in the dark psychology arsenal. It's the calculated use of kindness, not as a gift, but as a weapon. On the surface, it looks like generosity, compassion, even selflessness. But underneath, every act of giving is loaded with expectation, control, and invisible strings. It's not about helping you, it's about owning you. The manipulator offers support when you're most vulnerable. They lend money, give advice, offer emotional comfort, but there's always a cost. They don't ask for it up front. They wait. They let you bask in their kindness. They let you feel safe, and then, slowly, they collect. It starts with guilt. After everything I've done for you, then obligation. I just thought you'd be there for me too. Then control. You owe me this. False altruism thrives on moral imbalance. The manipulator positions themselves as the noble savior, and you, the indebted dependent. You didn't ask for the help, but now you're burdened by it. You feel ungrateful if you push back, ungrateful if you say no. It traps you in a prison of politeness, where every boundary you try to set feels like a betrayal. What makes this tactic so dangerous is how easily it hides. Society praises kindness. We're taught to honor those who help us. But when help becomes a leash, when support turns into silent control, the kindness was never real. It was a transaction dressed as compassion. And once you're caught in that emotional debt, you'll pay in loyalty, silence, and submission, even if it costs you everything. Emotional interception. Emotional interception is the hijacking of your feelings in real time, intervening not to soothe you, but to redirect your emotional current toward a desired path. It's when a manipulator steps into your emotional experience and subtly rewires it before you even process what you're feeling. They don't stop your emotions. They reshape them, twist them, reframe them into something that serves them and silences you. You might begin to express frustration, anger, sadness, but before your feeling fully surfaces, they interrupt with a redirection. You always take things so personally. Don't be dramatic, or you're just tired, that's all. These aren't attempts to understand. They're emotional override commands. Your feeling, raw and real, becomes invalidated, minimized, or spun into something shameful. And what follows is silence, confusion, sometimes even guilt. This tactic is devastating because it creates an internal dissonance. You feel something deeply, but you're told it's not real, not justified, not okay. Over time, you stop trusting your own emotional radar. You begin to filter everything through their interpretation, doubting your instincts, second-guessing your reactions. In close relationships, emotional interception becomes a form of psychological submission. You wait for them to label your emotions before deciding what's true. You adapt to avoid the discomfort. You even begin to pre-censor your feelings to maintain peace. But peace isn't what they want. What they want is control, and if they can interrupt your emotions before they take form, before they can be expressed, named, defended, they can shape the entire story, including your part in it, especially your part in it. Gratitude entanglement. Gratitude entanglement is a covert psychological tactic that transforms your thankfulness into a cage. It's not about inspiring appreciation, it's about weaponizing it. A manipulator creates situations where you feel so indebted, so emotionally overwhelmed by their kindness, that you begin to tie your worth, your loyalty, and even your freedom to the feeling of gratitude. You stop asking whether you want to stay. You start feeling like you have to. This tactic often begins with a grand gesture, something you didn't expect, didn't ask for, and didn't know how to repay. Maybe they support you during a crisis, give you a chance no one else would, or simply show up when no one else does. In that moment, you feel seen, saved, special. But that emotional high isn't the end. It's the hook. Soon after, the dynamic shifts. That moment of generosity becomes a silent contract. You feel guilty saying no, guilty setting boundaries. You catch yourself sacrificing your comfort just to avoid seeming ungrateful. Every interaction becomes filtered through the memory of what they did for you, twisting your decisions, silencing your instincts. Gratitude entanglement doesn't scream, it whispers. It disguises control as affection, power as generosity. And over time, it convinces you that you don't deserve to walk away, that you owe them your time, your loyalty, your silence, because they were there when no one else was. You start shrinking yourself to honor the debt. But the truth is, the debt was never real. The moment you were helped, a leash was quietly slipped around your neck, and every thank you you whisper only tightens it. Fake vulnerability. Fake vulnerability is one of the most insidious forms of manipulation because it masquerades as honesty, intimacy, and trust. It's when a manipulator exposes something personal, not to bond, but to bind. They tell you a story of pain, failure, trauma, or weakness, not to heal, but to disarm you. The moment you lean in with empathy, they've already won, because your compassion becomes their leverage. You listen to them talk about their toxic ex, their crippling anxiety, their trust issues. It feels raw, it feels real, and maybe some of it is. But what you don't see is the timing, the intent, the way their disclosure skips context and lands right on your boundaries. They tell you they've been hurt, so you won't get angry when they hurt you. They tell you they're broken, so you'll excuse the damage they cause. Vulnerability becomes a smokescreen. What makes fake vulnerability so effective is that it weaponizes your best qualities, your kindness, your desire to be the exception, your belief in second chances. You start to protect them, accommodate them, bend around their pain, and slowly your needs start to shrink. You feel guilty bringing up your feelings. You silence your instincts. After all, they've been through so much, right? But what you don't realize is that their pain is a performance, a calculated display designed to earn your loyalty, not your understanding. And when the mask slips, when you finally see the manipulation, it's often too late. You've already invested, you've already defended them, and walking away feels like betrayal, not of them, of the person they pretended to be. Sensory overload. Sensory overload is a dark manipulation technique that doesn't use logic or persuasion. It overwhelms. It floods the target's senses with so much noise, movement, light, emotion, or chaos that their critical thinking short-circuits and they become raw, reactive, and helplessly suggestible. It's not just discomfort, it's psychological drowning. And in that drowning, the manipulator becomes the only thing that feels stable. Imagine being hit with flashing lights, loud voices, erratic energy, rapid emotional shifts. Your brain begins to panic. Your nervous system scrambles for clarity, but there is none. Your focus fragments. Your boundaries blur. The manipulator uses this disorientation to bypass your mental defenses. They keep you busy processing the noise so you don't notice what they're slipping under the surface. Suggestions, commands, demands, or emotional hooks that would normally trigger resistance. Sensory overload often shows up in arguments designed to confuse, in toxic workplaces where chaos is constant, or in romantic relationships where love is mixed with intensity, drama, and unpredictability. You're bombarded with texts, calls, crying, laughter, accusations, apologies, until your system can't tell real from performative, calm from threat, truth from manipulation. Over time, you begin to associate calm with them, relief with them, because they also hold the power to stop the storm. And once they control both the chaos and the comfort, they control you completely. This tactic doesn't rely on reason, it relies on exhaustion. And once you're too tired to think, you'll start agreeing, not because you believe, but because you can't take any more noise. Microcriticisms. Microcriticisms are the slow, invisible poison of psychological control, delivered in fragments, coded in concern, wrapped in smiles. They are the subtle digs, the half-jokes, the carefully chosen words that seem harmless on the surface, but land like pinpricks beneath your skin. A manipulator doesn't need to yell or insult you to destroy your confidence. They simply bleed it out, one tiny cut at a time. It begins with a comment like, "Are you really wearing that?" Or, "You always get emotional about these things." They laugh after they say it. Maybe they follow it with, "I'm just teasing," or, "Don't take it so seriously." But it lingers. It always lingers. You brush it off, but the sting remains. And over time, those stings become scars. Microcriticisms thrive in ambiguity. They're not harsh enough to fight back against without looking defensive. That's the genius of them. You start to wonder if you're being too sensitive, if maybe you are overreacting. And that doubt, that is the manipulator's real goal. Because once you start questioning your reactions, you start questioning your worth. Eventually, you begin to change, not because they asked you to, but because you're trying to avoid the next subtle jab. You dress differently, speak less, dim your personality, not out of choice, but out of quiet fear. These tiny criticisms, spread over time, reshape your self-image. You don't even realize who you've become until you feel smaller in your own skin. And by then, the manipulator has succeeded, not by tearing you down all at once, but by making you dismantle yourself, piece by piece. Conflation framing. Conflation framing is a ruthless manipulation tactic that blurs lines between unrelated ideas until your ability to reason is hijacked by emotional confusion. It's the deliberate merging of two separate concepts, one emotionally charged, the other strategically positioned, so that rejecting one feels like rejecting both. You aren't just disagreeing, you're betraying, hurting, failing, and that's exactly how the manipulator wants you to feel. It starts with statements like, "If you loved me, you'd support this," or "Standing up to me means you don't value our relationship." The manipulator links an action they want to your core, identity, morality, or values, so that to resist them, you must violate yourself. It's a psychological snare. You can't oppose their idea without feeling like you're attacking something sacred. They might conflate loyalty with obedience, love with submission, respect with silence. Suddenly, asking a question means you're being ungrateful. Saying no means you're cruel. You stop arguing because it feels like you're not just defending your opinion, you're defending your right to think at all. And the emotional weight becomes unbearable. Conflation framing is especially potent in emotionally charged relationships and ideological manipulation. It's how cults make dissent feel like sin, how abusers turn disagreement into betrayal. It collapses the distinction between a person and their agenda until you can't tell the difference. And when you finally find the strength to push back, you're met with accusations. So everything I've done means nothing, because in their world, opposition is abandonment, and your truth gets swallowed by their framing every time. Savior projection. Savior projection is a manipulative illusion, a tactic where the manipulator casts themselves as your rescuer, your healer, your only lifeline. They don't show up with control. They show up with comfort, with understanding, with solutions to wounds you didn't even know they noticed. And slowly, they make you believe that without them, you would unravel. They observe you, find your weaknesses, and then appear as the one person who truly gets it. They speak your fears before you voice them. They anticipate your needs before you ask. It feels like fate, like connection, but it's not. It's a performance, because the same person who becomes your savior is often the one who created the chaos in the first place, or ensured that no one else could save you but them. At first, they seem to fix things. They help you through a rough day, solve a crisis, protect you from someone else's cruelty. You begin to associate them with safety, dependability, strength. But soon, the dynamic shifts. You don't just want their help, you need it. And they make sure of that. They encourage your helplessness. They discourage your independence. They subtly reinforce the idea that without them, you fall apart. It's a trap built on gratitude. You begin to feel guilty for ever questioning them. You doubt your own strength because they've carried you for so long. And slowly, your identity shifts from whole to helpless. You stop saving yourself because the savior is already there. But they don't save you for your sake. They save you so you'll never leave. Intimacy's bombing is a disarming and addictive manipulation tactic where the manipulator creates an overwhelming sense of closeness, trust, and emotional depth almost instantly. It's not genuine bonding. It's an ambush disguised as connection. You're flooded with affection, vulnerability, and shared secrets so quickly that your defenses collapse before you even realize they were needed. They'll tell you, "I've never felt this way before," or "You're the only one who understands me." Within hours or days, they're sharing their deepest wounds, childhood trauma, intimate hopes. They draw you into their world fast and hard, making you feel special, chosen, and deeply needed. And because humans are wired to reciprocate vulnerability, you respond, you share back, you let them in, you feel seen. But the bond you're building is an illusion, engineered for speed, not authenticity. You confuse intensity with intimacy. The manipulator skips the slow work of earning trust and manufactures closeness through emotional overload. They might love bomb you with attention, praise, physical affection, or constant contact. It feels like magic. It feels like destiny, but it's control. Once you're entangled, they tighten their grip. Your boundaries seem selfish. Your independence feels like abandonment. And worst of all, you're no longer sure what's real, because the version of them you fell for was crafted specifically to match your emotional blueprint. And if you try to pull away, they'll mourn you like a soulmate, accuse you of running from real love. You'll feel guilty for doubting. But somewhere inside, a voice whispers, "This isn't love. It's a trap, one you walked into with your heart wide open." Predatory empathy. Predatory empathy is the most seductive form of manipulation. It wears the mask of compassion while sinking its claws into your soul. It's the act of listening deeply, comforting fully, and mirroring your emotions with terrifying precision, all for one purpose: to extract your deepest vulnerabilities and weaponize them later. The manipulator doesn't just pretend to care, they make you believe they feel what you feel, and that belief becomes the leash. It begins in moments of weakness. You're raw, you're hurting, you open up, and they're right there, attentive, patient, warm. They say the exact words you needed to hear. You feel seen, heard, understood. You start to think, maybe this is someone safe, but what you don't see is that they're taking notes, mental snapshots of your pain, your history, your insecurities. They remember every detail, the abandonment you fear, the approval you crave, the guilt that haunts you. And when the time is right, they use it. They mimic those old wounds to trigger you. They twist your words to make you feel crazy. They echo your traumas, not to soothe them, but to reopen them when you resist. And because they were there when you broke, they know exactly how to break you again. Predatory empathy doesn't feel like manipulation, it feels like rescue, and that's why it works. You trust them more than anyone, because they were gentle when the world was cruel, but they weren't building trust, they were building leverage, and by the time you see the truth, you've already handed them the keys to your inner world. Reaction seeding. Reaction seeding is a subtle yet deeply invasive manipulation tactic that plants emotional landmines in your psyche, just waiting to detonate. The manipulator doesn't force you to feel anything. They simply insert a carefully crafted comment, question, or suggestion that lingers inside you like a splinter. And as your mind turns it over again and again, the reaction grows, not from what they said, but from what you do with it. It starts with an offhand remark. Funny how you always seem to forget the important stuff. Or, I'm surprised you're not more upset about that. They don't accuse, they don't explain, they drop the seed, and they wait. At first, it feels like nothing, but hours or even days later, it hits you. You're angry, ashamed, defensive, obsessed, and the manipulator? They're already a step ahead. This tactic works by exploiting your need to process unresolved thoughts. The seed burrows into your subconscious, demanding attention. You replay the conversation. You imagine what they really meant. You over-explain. You text them back. You bring it up again, only to be met with confusion. Why are you still thinking about that? Now you look unstable. You look reactive. They stay calm. You spiral. Reaction seeding is emotional warfare without the explosion. It allows manipulators to shape your mood, provoke guilt, trigger insecurities, or manufacture doubt without taking responsibility. You're left wondering why you can't stop thinking about something so small. But it's not small. It was planted with precision, because once they can control your reactions without saying much at all, they don't need to argue. They already own the battlefield inside your head. Phantom consensus. Phantom consensus is a psychological trick that fabricates social agreement where none exists. It's the illusion that everyone thinks this, most people agree, or you're the only one who feels that way, a tactic designed to isolate your viewpoint and pressure you into conformity. The manipulator doesn't need facts, they just need numbers, or rather, the illusion of numbers. It starts subtly. You express a concern and they reply with, well, no one else had a problem with it. You hesitate. You assume you're alone in your discomfort. And with that, your confidence cracks. Over time, they build a phantom crowd around you, an invisible majority of people who supposedly agree with them, not you. You don't see these people, you don't hear them, but their presence is implied in every conversation. Phantom consensus thrives on your social instincts. Humans are wired to seek belonging, to avoid exclusion. So when you believe that your feelings go against the group, you suppress them, you self-censor, you question your own judgment. It doesn't matter whether the consensus is real. What matters is that you believe it is. This tactic is especially potent in workplaces, families, and group dynamics where the threat of isolation stings the most. You begin to silence your truth, not because it changed, but because it feels dangerous to be the only one saying it. And the manipulator? They never had a crowd. They had you. But now they have you and your silence, because the moment you believe everyone agrees with them, your voice stops mattering, even to yourself. Validation. Validation baiting is a psychological snare disguised as self-doubt. It's the calculated use of false vulnerability to lure you into offering reassurance, praise, or emotional support, only to give the manipulator control over your emotions and behavior in return. It feels like you're helping someone. What you're really doing is stepping into a script they've written for you, one where your role is to validate, affirm, and eventually depend on their approval too. It starts subtly. They say things like, I'm probably just being dramatic, or you probably don't even care what I think. These aren't cries for help. They're hooks. You rush to comfort them, to disagree, to prove your loyalty, and in doing so, you begin handing over pieces of your emotional autonomy. You become the one trying to make them feel okay, constantly reassuring, constantly chasing their approval. The manipulator learns your patterns, what you'll respond to, what you'll defend, and what makes you feel responsible. Each time you bite the bait, they tighten the grip. Your self-worth becomes linked to how well you can support them, how fast you can soothe their insecurities, how deeply you can prove their doubts wrong. And when you slip, when you miss the cue, or don't validate them fast enough, they withdraw. They grow cold. They accuse you of not caring. Now you feel insecure. You start baiting for their validation. And just like that, the roles reverse. Validation baiting doesn't ask for love. It demands it in silence, tests it without warning, and punishes you for hesitating, until proving your loyalty becomes the only language you speak. Fragmented listening. Fragmented listening is a calculated tactic of partial attention, listening just enough to appear engaged, but never fully enough to understand. It's not about hearing you. It's about controlling the narrative you believe is being heard. A manipulator using this method picks and chooses what to acknowledge, what to ignore, and what to later distort, creating a fractured reflection of your truth that serves their agenda. You talk, you explain, you pour your heart out, and they nod, maybe even respond. But later, when the conversation is brought up, you realize they only remember parts, not the ones that mattered, not the ones that would hold them accountable. They recall a sentence out of context, a tone without its words. They say, "You never said that," or worse, "That's not what I heard." And in that moment, you start to question yourself. This is not forgetfulness. It's intentional filtration. They only register what can be used. Everything else is discarded. And the effect is maddening. You begin to repeat yourself, over-explain, reword, soften. You feel like you're never fully understood, yet always somehow on trial for what you said. Fragmented listening strips you of clarity. It's psychological erosion masked as miscommunication. And over time, it leads you to stop expressing altogether. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you've been taught your words won't survive intact. They will be reshaped, reinterpreted, and reused. It doesn't just steal your voice, it makes you fear the sound of it, because nothing feels more isolating than speaking the truth and watching it break apart in someone else's hands. Reverse reasoning. Reverse reasoning is a chilling manipulation tactic that flips logic inside out, turning emotions into evidence and reactions into justification. It's the process of starting with the conclusion the manipulator wants, and then forcing you to mentally work backward to explain it to yourself. The goal isn't to persuade you through facts, it's to confuse you so deeply that you do the work of rationalizing their agenda. It begins with a claim that feels emotionally jarring. "You clearly don't care about me," or "You're always making things worse." You instinctively want to disagree, but instead, you pause. You question yourself. Why do they think that? What did I do wrong? You start building a story in your head to explain their accusation, even if the accusation itself is false. That's how reverse reasoning hooks you. The manipulator doesn't have to prove their point. They just say it with conviction, and your brain, desperate to resolve emotional discomfort, fills in the blanks. You scan your past, looking for moments that could justify what they said. Maybe I was being distant last week. Maybe I do overreact sometimes. You create the evidence. You build the case against yourself. Over time, this tactic makes you believe that emotional outbursts must have logical roots, that their hurt must come from something you did, even if it doesn't, especially if it doesn't. And once you start explaining their pain instead of challenging it, they own your sense of truth. You become the defendant, jury, and judge in a trial they scripted, convicting yourself over crimes you never committed. Covert disqualification. Covert disqualification is a psychological sleight of hand, a tactic where a manipulator subtly undermines your worth, your ideas, or your credibility without ever appearing hostile. It doesn't come as an insult, it comes wrapped in politeness, smirking sarcasm, or casual indifference. The damage is quiet, almost invisible, but it cuts deep. You say something you're proud of, and they smile faintly. Interesting perspective. You offer a solution, and they reply, "That's one way to look at it." You share an accomplishment, and they shrug. "Oh, I thought everyone was doing that now." These aren't outright attacks. They're tiny dismissals, crafted to slip beneath your awareness while still bruising your confidence. You walk away from these exchanges confused, unsure why you suddenly feel smaller. Covert disqualification thrives on plausible deniability. If you confront it, the manipulator will act surprised. "I didn't mean anything by it," or "You're reading too much into it." So you doubt your reaction. You swallow your discomfort, and it happens again and again until you stop sharing, until you stop shining. What makes this tactic so corrosive is its consistency. No single comment is enough to push you over, but together they wear you down. Your passion dulls, your voice softens, you shrink your presence to avoid being subtly stripped of your dignity. Eventually, you start disqualifying yourself before they even can. That's the goal, not just to challenge your worth, but to convince you to bury it, quietly, voluntarily, until the only version of you that remains is the one they've made small enough to control. False memory planting is a terrifyingly effective manipulation technique that doesn't just twist your emotions, it rewires your reality. It's the subtle, deliberate act of suggesting, repeating, or insinuating details about past events that never actually happened until your mind accepts them as truth. You begin to remember moments, feelings, and conversations that were fabricated, and once you believe them, they control you. It starts innocently. The manipulator says, "You were so angry that night. You don't remember yelling at me?" Or, "You promised you'd support me no matter what. You don't remember that?" You pause. You're unsure. Maybe you did say that. Maybe you did act that way. And in the space of that doubt, the false memory begins to grow. They'll repeat it, reference it casually, mention it in front of others. Over time, the invented moment becomes part of your emotional landscape. You start to feel the guilt, the regret, the shame, as if the event truly occurred, and that emotional response anchors the memory even deeper. Now you're not just doubting your recollection, you're carrying the weight of it. False memory planting is used to distort timelines, create guilt, justify punishment, and rewrite entire narratives. It's psychological gaslighting taken to a deeper level, where the goal isn't to make you question what's happening, it's to make you question who you've been. Once your memories can be edited, your identity becomes malleable. You lose the power to defend yourself, not because the facts aren't there, but because you no longer trust your own mind. And in that vacuum, the manipulator becomes the author of your past and the architect of your guilt. Proximity manipulation. Proximity manipulation is the silent invasion of your physical and emotional space, done not with force, but with calculated closeness. It's the tactic of using distance, nearness, presence, or absence to regulate your emotions and alter your behavior without saying a single word. The manipulator doesn't need to speak. They just have to be there, or suddenly not be, at exactly the right moment to create discomfort, desire, guilt, or dependency. They lean in too close when you're vulnerable. They stand just far enough away when you need reassurance. They show up unannounced when you're trying to think, and disappear without warning when you need support. It feels random, but it's not. Every move is a message. Every absence is punishment. Every sudden presence is pressure. Proximity manipulation exploits your nervous system. When someone's physical presence changes your emotional state, makes you feel relief, tension, panic, or guilt, your brain starts associating their location with your own internal safety, and they know it. They create patterns, warmth when obedient, withdrawal when defiant. You begin to chase their nearness like oxygen. You crave their presence not because it's comforting, but because they've made the alternative unbearable. In romantic relationships, it feels like emotional whiplash. In workplaces, it feels like walking on glass. In families, it feels like needing to earn love that should be unconditional. But everywhere, it feels like instability disguised as intimacy. You don't realize it's control because they never raised their voice. They didn't need to. They used your own body against you, taught it to fear distance, to beg for closeness, and to confuse manipulation for connection. Cognitive fatigue bombing. Cognitive fatigue bombing is a relentless manipulation tactic designed to exhaust your mental defenses until you surrender, not out of agreement, but out of sheer depletion. It works by overwhelming your mind with a non-stop barrage of demands, contradictions, rapid changes, emotional whiplash, and circular conversations. The goal isn't to convince you, it's to wear you down so completely that you stop resisting. A manipulator using this tactic might flood you with text messages, rapid-fire arguments, long-winded explanations, or constantly shifting emotional tones from anger to affection to silence, all in a matter of hours. You never get a chance to process. You never feel grounded. Your brain enters survival mode, scrambling to keep up, to make sense of the chaos, to stay afloat in a storm of words, emotions, and expectations. At first, you try to reason, you explain, you ask for space, but the manipulator refuses clarity. They overload, they interrupt, they twist your words, change the subject, bring up old wounds mid-conversation, and guilt trip you for needing a break. You feel like you're losing control, not just of the conversation, but of your thoughts. Eventually, your cognitive capacity fractures. You begin agreeing just to end the discussion. You give in, not because you've changed your mind, but because you have nothing left to fight with. And in that moment, the manipulator wins, not by proving their point, but by draining yours. Cognitive fatigue bombing doesn't destroy you in one blow. It grinds you into silence, into compliance, until you no longer think clearly. You just nod, just to make it stop. Neutral masking. Neutral masking is the psychological tactic of hiding intent, emotion, and judgment behind a facade of calm detachment. It's the poker face of manipulation, a blank expression, a measured tone, an unreadable presence that disorients you and leaves you doubting your own emotional reality. The manipulator doesn't react when you expect them to. They don't comfort when you cry, don't flinch when you shout, don't celebrate when you win. They become a mirror that gives you nothing back, and that nothing becomes power. You raise a concern, and they respond with, okay. You share your excitement, and they blink. You confess something deeply personal, and they say, noted. At first, it feels confusing. You try harder to connect. You over-explain. You apologize for emotions that needed no apology. Because in the presence of neutrality, your feelings feel like noise, and you start to believe that maybe they are. Neutral masking is designed to make you feel unstable. When someone shows no emotion, no reaction, no feedback, it forces you into self-monitoring. You question your tone, your word choice, your timing. You replay conversations in your head, trying to find what you did wrong. But the truth is, you did nothing. That void was built for you to fill. Over time, you adapt. You shrink your feelings. You flatten your voice. You regulate yourself so they don't have to. And eventually, you start masking yourself just to match them. That's when they win. Because the most chilling control isn't loud. It doesn't shout, insult, or explode. It simply watches you break and calls it balance. Empathy looping. Empathy looping is a manipulative psychological tactic that traps you in an endless cycle of emotional caretaking, where the more compassion you offer, the deeper you sink into their control. It's the calculated exploitation of your empathy, where the manipulator continuously surfaces pain vulnerability, or personal trauma, not to heal, but to keep you tethered to their emotional gravity. They open up often, they cry, break down, share brutal memories or painful thoughts. You feel honored to be trusted, moved to comfort, responsible to help, and just when it seems they're getting better, the cycle resets. Another wound is revealed, another breakdown, another crisis that only you seem to understand. You tell yourself, they need me. But what's really happening is emotional dependency being forged in the fire of your compassion. You start neglecting your own needs to support theirs. You suppress your doubts, because how could you walk away from someone in so much pain? You downplay the emotional toll on yourself, thinking you're just being too sensitive. But the manipulator doesn't want resolution. They want repetition. They want you invested in their healing, so they never have to heal. And so you stay, looping through guilt, sympathy, closeness, exhaustion. Empathy looping is especially dangerous because it feels like love. It feels like loyalty. But underneath, it's one-sided devotion built on emotional blackmail. You're not a partner. You're a lifeline. And if you ever try to leave, they'll collapse in front of you, forcing you to choose between your freedom and their suffering. And every time you stay, the loop tightens until their pain becomes your prison. Crisis engineering. Crisis engineering is the deliberate creation or escalation of chaos to gain control, sympathy, or dependence. It's when a manipulator manufactures drama, emergencies, or emotional disasters, often out of nothing, so they can step in as the solution or anchor themselves deeper into your life. It's not about surviving storms. It's about building them, placing you in the middle, and then handing you the umbrella with their name on it. They'll forget a critical deadline and blame someone else. They'll start a fight right before an important event. They'll create an emotional breakdown at the moment you begin to find stability. They turn calm waters turbulent, not randomly, but when your power threatens to grow. Then they position themselves as the only one who can calm the waves. This tactic works because crises demand focus. When you're in emotional or logistical chaos, you can't think critically. You don't notice manipulation. You just want relief. You reach for whatever feels stable, and they've already made sure they're the only thing that does. They become the rescuer, the supporter, the martyr, and you become the dependent, the grateful, the silence. Crisis engineering also resets control. Every time you begin to pull away, build boundaries, or feel confident, they detonate a problem. You're forced to come closer, to pause your needs, to comfort them. And slowly, you forget what peace felt like. Because in their world, stability is the enemy of control. And as long as the room is on fire, you'll never notice who's holding the match. Permission priming. Permission priming is a subtle yet powerful manipulation tactic that trains you to say yes before you even realize what you're agreeing to. It's the psychological groundwork manipulators lay by getting you to consent to small, harmless requests, strategically designed to lower your guard and create a pattern of compliance. By the time the real ask comes, your reflex to agree is already conditioned. It often begins with simple things. Can I borrow your pen? Mind if I text you later? Do you have a second? These don't seem significant, but each yes is a psychological handshake, an unspoken agreement that starts to embed trust and compliance into your nervous system. Then the requests grow, just slightly, a favor, a compromise, a deviation from your values, and each time the manipulator reminds you you said yes before. Your brain starts building a narrative. I've helped them before, so this must be okay. If I say no now, I'll seem inconsistent. It's probably not that big of a deal, but it is a big deal because you're being led away from your intuition, one prime decision at a time. What makes permission priming dangerous is how good it feels at first. You feel agreeable, cooperative, trusted, but the manipulator is testing your thresholds, measuring how far you'll go without protest. They don't need to pressure you when they can train you. And when you finally hesitate, they weaponize your past compliance. You didn't have a problem before. Why now? That guilt keeps you in the loop. And before you know it, you're saying yes to things you never would have considered, just to stay consistent with a story they started writing for you. Pacing and leading is a manipulation technique that gains control by first earning trust, by echoing your behavior, beliefs, or emotions only to steer you somewhere you didn't agree to go. It begins with alignment. The manipulator paces you by matching your language, your rhythm, your viewpoint. You feel seen, understood, like you found someone who truly gets you. But that sense of connection is bait, because once you're synced, they begin to lead. At first, their words reflect your thoughts. I know how overwhelming it gets. You just want peace. You're not the kind of person who gives up. And you nod. You agree. Their voice sounds like yours. Their emotions feel familiar. But then, just slightly, it shifts. They introduce a new direction. That's why it makes sense to let this go. Or, that's why you should trust me on this. And because they've walked beside you for so long, you follow. Pacing and leading works because of psychological mirroring. When someone validates your internal world, your defenses drop. You bond. You accept their presence as non-threatening, even supportive. But once they have your trust, they begin to subtly redirect your thoughts, guide your decisions, shape your perception of what's right, even of who you are. It's often used in persuasion, negotiation, and seduction, but it also thrives in toxic relationships and manipulation. The victim rarely sees it happening. They think they're making their own choices. They don't realize they've been walking on a path carefully paved by someone else. And by the time they do, they're already far from where they meant to go. Negative anchoring. Negative anchoring is a psychological manipulation technique that latches a person's thoughts, emotions, or decisions to a specific negative reference point, ensuring that everything afterward feels like relief, even if it's still harmful. It's the deliberate setup of a worst-case scenario to make a lesser but still manipulative option feel acceptable, even welcome. The manipulator doesn't need you to like what they offer. They just need to make you fear what came before. It begins with discomfort. They introduce an idea, behavior, or experience that shocks you, emotionally, ethically, or physically. Maybe it's an outburst, a cruel comment, a threat. You flinch, recoil, feel violated. Then they pull back. They offer something milder, a compromise, a softer tone, a less extreme demand. And suddenly, you feel grateful. You breathe again. You see them as reasonable, but nothing's changed. They've just reframed the abuse. Your brain anchors to the earlier trauma. Every future experience is measured against that moment. And in that comparison, you stop fighting. You stop questioning. You settle for less, because at least it's not like before. The manipulator becomes both the cause of your pain and the architect of your relief. They've created the illness and sold you the cure. Over time, you forget where your original boundaries were. You begin to tolerate mistreatment, not because it feels good, but because it feels better than the worst. Negative anchoring turns trauma into leverage. It makes you adjust your standards downward without even realizing. And as long as they can control what you're anchored to, they never have to be kind. They just have to be kinder than they were when they broke you. Emotional ghosting. Emotional ghosting is not just absence. It's abandonment disguised as silence. It's when a manipulator withdraws emotionally while still being physically present, leaving you in a cold void where connection once lived. They don't yell, they don't fight, they just stop feeling with you. You reach for warmth and find nothing. You speak and hear echoes, you cry and they blink. It's the kind of loneliness that hurts more when someone is sitting right next to you. This tactic is meant to confuse. One day they're engaged, affectionate, responsive. The next they're a wall. You scan their face for clues. You ask, "Is everything okay?" And they shrug, "I'm just tired." You try harder. You apologize for things you didn't do. You become smaller, softer, more careful, hoping they'll come back to life. But they never truly explain. That's the point. Emotional ghosting is meant to destabilize. It turns you into a detective of your own relationship, forever chasing a connection that they control like a switch. When you behave, they reward you with warmth. When you resist, question, or confront, they vanish again. And soon, you begin to associate emotional closeness with obedience. You silence your needs just to avoid the silence they impose. It's punishment without violence, rejection without closure, and over time, it breaks your sense of worth. Because when someone disappears emotionally but refuses to leave physically, they teach you how to grieve in the presence of the living. You start mourning someone who still breathes beside you, and you call that love. Emotional flooding. Emotional flooding is a manipulation tactic that hits you with an overwhelming surge of emotion so intense and sudden that your ability to think, decide, or defend yourself is completely drowned out. It's the psychological equivalent of a tidal wave coming at you with love, rage, desperation, guilt, or grief so relentlessly that your logical mind shuts down in pure survival mode. The goal isn't resolution, it's domination. The manipulator might break down sobbing mid-conversation. They may scream, confess undying love, threaten to leave, or bring up past trauma in vivid detail, all in one volatile burst. It's loud, it's chaotic, it's disorienting, and in that storm, you're left clinging to emotional debris, just trying to stay afloat. You stop arguing, you stop resisting, you shift into appeasement, anything to calm the chaos. But that's the trap. They don't want clarity, they want control. By flooding the emotional landscape, they force you to absorb their intensity, so your reactions, your needs, your truth become secondary. You become the caretaker, the fixer, the emotional sponge, and once you've played that role, it's hard to step out of it. You start managing their feelings instead of honoring your own. This tactic is most often used in abusive relationships, where the lines between love, fear, guilt, and devotion are blurred beyond recognition. You can't win an argument in a flood. You can only survive it. And the manipulator knows that, because once you've surrendered your logic in exchange for emotional peace, they no longer need to convince you. They just need to overwhelm you again and again until the flood becomes the norm and your silence, the only dry place left. Reciprocity sabotage. Reciprocity's sabotage is the calculated rejection of your kindness, designed not to offend, but to control. It's when a manipulator refuses your help, dismisses your gestures, or avoids accepting your support, not because they're selfless, but because they want to disrupt the natural balance of give and take. You offer, they decline. You reach out, they retreat. And slowly, you begin to feel unneeded, irrelevant, less than. At first, it seems like humility. You don't have to do that. I've got it handled. I don't want to burden you. But it's not humility. It's strategic distance. Because every time they refuse your effort, they maintain the upper hand. You become the one who owes, the one who receives, the one who must earn closeness rather than share it equally. And yet, they will still expect your loyalty, your availability, your unconditional understanding. You give and give, but when it's your turn, there's nothing in return, not because they can't, but because they won't, because accepting your effort would make you equal, and equality threatens control. This tactic leaves you emotionally starved. You start to feel like your love is intrusive, like your support is a weakness. You begin to overcompensate, offering more and more, trying to prove your value. But no matter what you give, it's never accepted in full, only tolerated, briefly acknowledged, and then dismissed. Reciprocity sabotage doesn't just make you feel unworthy. It teaches you that your love has no place unless it's one-sided, and once you believe that, you'll stop expecting anything at all. Double-bind phrasing. Double-bind phrasing is a psychological trap that disguises manipulation as choice, when in reality, every option leads exactly where the manipulator wants you to go. It's the carefully constructed illusion of freedom, where the phrasing of a question or directive forces you into compliance no matter how you respond. You feel like you're choosing, but you're only choosing between submission and submission. The manipulator frames their language to corner you. Are you going to be mature about this, or are you going to make a scene? Do you want to talk now, or after you calm down? So you'd rather fight than fix this? Each option is loaded. Each one presupposes something damaging about you, unless you pick the answer that suits them. You're not being asked, you're being coerced under the illusion of consent. This tactic is brutally effective because it bypasses critical thinking. You don't stop to question the premise. You're too busy choosing how to respond. You think you're asserting yourself, but the framework is already rigged. It happens in arguments, negotiations, toxic families, and abusive relationships. It's the invisible cage built from words. Over time, double-bind phrasing trains you to accept distorted logic. You become afraid of picking the wrong option, of being labeled difficult, irrational, or cruel. You begin to agree, not because you believe, but because you fear what your choices imply. And that's the power of this trap. It turns every protest into proof of guilt, every decision into validation for the manipulator. You're no longer deciding between right and wrong. You're just trying not to lose. And either way, you already have. Low-grade gaslighting. Low-grade gaslighting is the quiet, everyday erosion of your reality. It's not the dramatic, obvious kind where someone flat out denies events or calls you crazy. It's subtler, slower, and far more dangerous. It's when a manipulator chips away at your certainty in tiny, constant ways, enough to make you second-guess your perception, but not enough to call it abuse. You feel confused, not attacked, unsteady, not broken, and that's the trap. It might sound like, you're remembering it wrong, or that's not what I meant. You always twist things. Sometimes it's a look, a sigh, a delay in response that makes you question whether your feelings are even valid. It's them forgetting your boundaries and then making you feel guilty for setting them. It's them changing plans and acting like you imagined the original ones. Over time, these micro-denials turn your mind into a battleground between what you felt and what they say happened. Low-grade gaslighting is designed to stay under the radar. If you point it out, they'll call you sensitive, defensive, or dramatic. So you stop pointing it out. You stop trusting your memory. You begin checking your tone before speaking, apologizing for emotions you barely expressed. You shrink, not because you're weak, but because their version of reality is louder than yours. Eventually, you don't know what's real anymore. You rely on their reactions to decide how to feel. You replay conversations in your head like crime scenes, trying to find what you did wrong. And by the time you realize what's happened, you're already gone, replaced by someone they could manage, someone who doubts their own mind. Low-grade gaslighting. Low-grade gaslighting is the slow suffocation of your reality, not through blatant lies, but through subtle contradictions, half-denials, and quiet dismissals. It's the art of making you doubt what you saw, what you heard, what you felt, just enough to plant a seed of uncertainty, not enough to alarm you, but enough to make you question yourself over time. It starts small. You mention something they said, and they respond with, "That's not what I meant," or "You're twisting my words." You react to a hurtful moment and hear, "You're being too sensitive," or "You always overreact." You feel something in your gut, but they gently imply that your perception is flawed. You must be tired. You're just stressed. It sounds rational, reasonable, but the effect is corrosive. You begin to wonder, was I wrong? Did I imagine it? You start rereading messages, replaying conversations, dissecting your own memory like it's untrustworthy. That constant second-guessing becomes your new baseline. And the manipulator? They continue gently, steadily, never pushing too hard, just enough to keep you off balance. Low-grade gaslighting thrives in everyday conversations. It's harder to detect than overt gaslighting because it feels like miscommunication, like misunderstanding. But that's the danger. It slips beneath your awareness until your trust in yourself quietly withers. And once that trust is gone, you don't need to be controlled anymore. You'll start silencing yourself because you won't believe your truth is worth speaking at all. Insecurity amplification. Insecurity amplification is a dark psychological tactic that targets your softest places, your hidden doubts, your buried fears, your private wounds, and magnifies them just enough to make you bend. It's not direct attack. It's precision pressure. The manipulator doesn't insult you. They simply shine a spotlight on the cracks that already exist and whisper, "See, you're not enough." They watch for your weak spots. Maybe it's your looks, your intelligence, your worthiness, and then they begin. "You look tired today. That's an interesting choice. I'm surprised you didn't know that." These aren't screaming criticisms. They're subtle nudges, little echoes of the voice you already battle inside. But coming from them, they hit harder. The power of this tactic lies in how familiar it feels, because the thoughts they highlight are often the ones you already have in the dark. The difference is, now you hear them out loud, validated, echoed, real, and that validation turns self-doubt into truth. Over time, you adjust to avoid triggering their commentary. You wear what they like. You speak less. You second-guess every decision. You seek their approval like oxygen because they've made you believe you need it to survive. Insecurity, amplification doesn't create your flaws. It weaponizes your perception of them until one day you stop trying to be better for yourself. You just try to be less disappointing for them. Strategic silence. Strategic silence is not absence. It is pressure. It's the intentional withholding of words, responses, or acknowledgement to create discomfort, provoke insecurity, or regain control. A manipulator doesn't stay silent because they have nothing to say. They stay silent because they know exactly what their silence will do to you. You send a message, no reply. You speak your truth, no reaction. You cry, confess, apologize, and all you get is a blank stare or dead air. The silence isn't passive, it's deafening, and in that void, your mind turns against you. You fill the gap with self-blame, panic, desperation. Did I go too far? Are they angry? Did I ruin everything? The manipulator doesn't have to raise their voice. Your imagination does it for them. Strategic silence thrives in emotional dependence. The more you care about their response, the more tormenting their silence becomes. It turns you into the pursuer, the pleaser, the one who bends just to break the silence. And when they finally speak, usually when you're softened, apologetic, and off balance, it feels like a relief. But it's not relief, it's reinforcement. You've just been trained. This silence isn't about peace, it's about power. It's used to punish dissent, to interrupt your confidence, to freeze you mid-thought and make you question your worth. It's the grown-up version of turning off the lights and locking the door, not to leave you alone, but to make sure you come knocking. Because silence in the hands of a manipulator doesn't soothe. It controls what you'll say next and what you'll never dare say again. Scarcity mirroring is a manipulation tactic that makes you believe that the manipulator's time, affection, attention, or presence is a rare, precious commodity, one you must earn, chase, or compete for. It's the intentional creation of emotional drought, a psychological illusion that convinces you that their availability is limited and therefore infinitely valuable. But the truth is, the scarcity is fabricated. They show up intensely at first, loving, engaging, magnetic. You feel chosen, seen, special, but then they pull back, not all the way, just enough to make you feel the shift. They become less responsive, They cancel plans. Their warmth turns cool. They don't explain. They let you wonder. That uncertainty isn't accidental. It's bait. You begin to work harder, to become more agreeable, more attractive, more impressive. You believe if you can just be better, the closeness will return, but it doesn't. Not completely, because they never intended to give it freely. The scarcity isn't real. It's a mirror, reflecting your desire and insecurity back at you. This tactic triggers a primal survival response. Humans crave consistency in connection. When something once abundant suddenly becomes scarce, our brain interprets it as loss, threat, rejection. We chase the high of that original intimacy. We mistake the manipulator's withdrawal for our own inadequacy, and that belief becomes a leash. Scarcity mirroring rewires your sense of self-worth. You stop asking if they're worth your time and start obsessing over whether you're worth theirs. And once you reach that point, they don't have to withhold anything anymore, because you've already convinced yourself that you don't deserve more. Invisible benchmarking. Invisible benchmarking is a covert manipulation tactic where you are constantly compared, not to someone real, but to an ideal you can never see, never meet, and never satisfy. It's the use of vague, unnamed standards to make you feel perpetually inadequate without ever telling you exactly why. A manipulator doesn't say, "You're not enough." They say, "I just thought you'd handle this better," or "Other people wouldn't react like that." And suddenly, you're failing a test you never knew you were taking. This tactic isn't about growth. It's about pressure. You try harder. You overperform. You bend your boundaries, chasing a moving goalpost that never reveals itself, because there's no benchmark, no face, no finish line, just the shadow of someone better, calmer, smarter, more attractive, someone who isn't you. The pain of invisible benchmarking comes from the ambiguity. If the manipulator names someone, you could evaluate. If they describe the expectation clearly, you could improve, but they don't, because clarity would give you power. Instead, they weaponize implication. You always feel slightly off, slightly behind, slightly not enough. Over time, this constant, undefined comparison infects your self-esteem. You measure yourself against ghosts. You lose confidence in your decisions, your emotions, your instincts. You stop asking, "What do I need?" and start asking, "How do I become what they want?" Whoever that is. And the manipulator? They stay silent, withholding validation, watching you race toward perfection, without ever admitting they built the track to lead nowhere. Because when you're chasing invisible standards, you'll never rest, never question, and never leave. Identity hijacking. Identity hijacking is the psychological theft of who you believe you are, an insidious tactic where a manipulator subtly rewrites your self-image, not by force, but by suggestion, framing, and emotional repetition. It starts with flattery, empathy, even admiration. You're so selfless. You've always been the strong one. You're not like other people. It feels good at first. You feel seen, elevated, unique. But what you don't realize is that these labels are not gifts. They're cages. Slowly, you begin to live up to the identity they've created. You become the caretaker who never asks for help, the loyal partner who forgives everything, the strong one who never breaks. You internalize their definitions of you, and those definitions begin to shape your decisions, your boundaries, your voice. What once felt like praise starts to feel like pressure, but by then, it's too familiar to reject. If you push back, they remind you you're not acting like yourself. You used to be different, and the worst part is you believe them, because the version of you they built is now the one you fear losing, even if it's killing you. Identity hijacking works because it doesn't attack your self-esteem, it seduces it. It offers a narrative that feels meaningful, but it's one you didn't write. And as it grows, it swallows the real you, the flawed, evolving, powerful version, and replaces it with a fixed mask that only serves them. You don't notice the theft happening. You just wake up one day and realize you're living someone else's definition of you. Controlled escalation. Controlled escalation is a manipulation tactic that turns intensity into leverage. It's when a manipulator gradually raises the emotional, psychological, or relational stakes, not in chaos, but in carefully measured increments, to dominate the dynamic and keep you on edge. They don't explode without reason. They build to it, and every step is designed to test how far they can go before you break or give in. It starts with tension, a sharp comment, a passive-aggressive jab, a sudden mood shift. You feel the heat rise but can't explain it. Then comes the louder voice, the longer silence, the sharper accusation. You try to calm the situation, hoping it won't get worse, and that's exactly the point. You begin to compromise just to de-escalate. You surrender small truths, silence your instincts, take the blame just to stop the spiral. But the spiral is engineered. The manipulator raises the volume, the threat, the emotional risk just enough to make you flinch but not flee. They learn your thresholds. They learn where to stop and where to push harder next time. Over time, what once felt unacceptable becomes routine. You adapt to their escalation. You adjust to survive. Controlled escalation isn't about emotion. It's about conditioning. By steadily increasing the cost of resistance, they teach you that peace only comes through submission. You start doing whatever it takes to keep the volume down, to avoid the storm. But the storm was never about what you did. It was always about what they could get away with. Next, incremental desensitization. Incremental desensitization is the slow erosion of your boundaries, one tiny step at a time. It's a psychological tactic that never demands too much too fast. Instead, it asks for just a little, then a little more, and a little more, until what once felt wrong now feels normal, and what once felt dangerous now feels like love, like loyalty, like life. The manipulator begins with something small, a subtle insult disguised as teasing, a boundary slightly pushed, a favor that makes you uncomfortable but is easy to justify. You let it slide because it's not worth the fight, because they didn't mean it like that, because you don't want to seem dramatic. But that moment of silence, that hesitation, it becomes their green light. Each step they take is carefully calibrated. Not too far, never too fast. They condition you to tolerate discomfort. They normalize the unacceptable in increments so tiny you barely notice the shift. One day, it's a raised voice. Then it's a slammed door. Then it's silence for punishment. Then it's blame. Then it's control. But every step forward feels only slightly worse than the last. And that's the trap. You never fall off the cliff. You slide down it. Your tolerance expands as your standards shrink. You adapt. You endure. You explain away what should break you. Because what breaks you no longer shocks you. Incremental desensitization doesn't shatter you. It numbs you until you wake up in a life you would have run from had it all happened in a single day. Grief hijacking. Grief hijacking is a chilling manipulation tactic where someone exploits your pain, not to comfort, but to control. It's when a manipulator inserts themselves into your mourning, your heartbreak, your devastation, not to support your healing, but to rewrite the script around themselves. They don't hold space for your sorrow. They occupy it. And suddenly, your grief becomes about them. They might say, "I just hate seeing you like this," or "This is hard on me too." They may cry with you, not to connect, but to redirect. They become the co-star in your tragedy, demanding care when you're the one in pieces, or worse, they'll position themselves as your only lifeline, hovering close, making you reliant, all while ensuring that your pain never fully resolves, because a healed, you might not need them. Grief hijacking often masquerades as empathy. It feels like closeness, like shared suffering, but beneath the surface, they're weaving dependence. They interrupt your silence with their noise. They insert guilt into your healing. They make you feel like your sadness is something they must manage and that you owe them for enduring it with you. And if you ever pull away, they'll weaponize the memory. After everything I did for you when you were grieving, they turn your most vulnerable moment into emotional debt. True support helps you stand again. Grief hijacking ensures you stay kneeling, next to the person who claimed to lift you, but only ever held you down, because in your darkest hour, they didn't protect your heart. They claimed ownership of it. Disempowerment. Disempowerment framing is a manipulation tactic that disguises limitation as wisdom and control as concern. It's the subtle art of redefining your strength, capability, or independence as something reckless, naive, or selfish, so you begin to doubt your own power. The manipulator doesn't strip you of your confidence. They redefine it, reframe it, poison it with just enough doubt to make you hand it over willingly. They say things like, "You're just not seeing the full picture," or "You're too emotional to make that decision right now." At first, it sounds thoughtful, protective even, but it plants a seed. Maybe you aren't ready. Maybe you do need guidance. Maybe your instincts are wrong. You don't feel attacked. You feel cared for. And that's what makes it dangerous. Over time, your clarity weakens. You pause before trusting yourself. You ask for permission when you used to act. You explain yourself more. You shrink, not because they demanded it, but because they slowly framed your independence as a threat to your own well-being. This tactic is especially effective in relationships built on trust. Parents, partners, mentors, people whose approval matters, because when they question your choices under the veil of wisdom, you second-guess everything. You start to filter your decisions through their perception of what's safe, smart, or mature. Disempowerment framing doesn't silence you directly. It makes you believe your voice is dangerous, and once you accept that, they never have to overpower you again. You'll choose submission all by yourself. Plausible deniability engineering. Plausible deniability engineering is the meticulous construction of ambiguity, a manipulative tactic where every harmful action is cloaked in just enough vagueness, just enough softness, just enough maybe to avoid accountability. The manipulator doesn't deny what they did. They make it so you can't prove it. They build a world where every red flag comes with a shadow of doubt, and in that shadow they hide. They send a text that flirts with the edge, then laugh and say, "It was just a joke." They insult you gently, then act surprised you took it personally. They break promises, then remind you they never technically said yes. Every word is wrapped in loopholes. Every action can be rewritten, and every time you confront them, they slip through the cracks they engineered on purpose. This tactic turns confrontation into futility. You begin to hesitate before speaking up. You question your memory, your tone, your right to feel hurt. You replay conversations in your mind, trying to find the exact line where they crossed it, but you can't, because they smeared the line before you got there. Plausible deniability isn't carelessness, it's craft. It's a carefully layered shield that allows the manipulator to be cruel without consequence. And if you accuse them, they respond with moral outrage. "How dare you think I do that?" They make you look like the paranoid one, the unstable one, the one who always twists things. And the more they get away with, the more you learn to swallow pain in silence, because your truth doesn't stand a chance against their doubt. False dichotomy. Framing false dichotomy. Framing is the manipulator's scalpel, used to carve the world into two rigid, opposing choices and force you to pick the one that serves them. It's the illusion of freedom, a psychological trap that says you can either do this or that. No room for nuance, no space for alternatives, just pressure disguised as logic. They frame your choices like this: you're either with me or against me. You can either be loyal or selfish. You either forgive me or keep holding on to the past. These aren't real options. They're ultimatums in disguise. The manipulator controls both ends of the spectrum. One path leads to conflict or shame, the other leads to submission, and you're cornered into choosing the one that cost you the most. What makes this tactic so insidious is how reasonable it sounds. It's structured, clean. It appeals to the brain's desire to simplify, to resolve tension quickly. You don't want to be the bad one, so you lean into the good choice, even when it betrays your boundaries, your needs, your truth. False dichotomy. Framing crushes complexity. It strips you of the gray areas where your real voice lives. Over time, you lose sight of your power to choose from a wider spectrum. You forget that compromise, curiosity, and third options ever existed. And in that shrinking mental space, you become easier to predict, easier to control, easier to break. Because when you only see two doors, fight or submit, you'll almost always choose the one that hurts you less, even if neither door should have been there at all. Time pressure trapping. Time pressure trapping is the manipulation of urgency, a tactic that creates artificial deadlines, rushed decisions, and emotional countdowns to shut down your critical thinking. It's not about giving you less time, it's about giving you no time. No time to think, to feel, to breathe, just a ticking clock designed to make you say yes when your heart screams no. A manipulator says things like, "I need an answer now," or "This opportunity won't last." They corner you with ultimatums. They frame hesitation as betrayal. Every second you pause is turned into pressure. You feel like if you don't act now, you'll lose something: love, approval, safety. But what you're actually losing is your agency. Time pressure triggers your fight or flight response. The stress floods your body. You want to escape the tension, so you comply. You agree. You make promises, sign deals, forgive betrayals, not because you're ready, but because the moment demanded it. And that's exactly what they wanted. Not consent, compliance, not clarity, control. This tactic is used in abusive relationships, high-pressure sales, cult recruitment, even toxic parenting. It masquerades as decisiveness, passion, spontaneity, but it's not excitement, it's entrapment. And the moment you give in, the trap resets. Next time, the pressure hits faster, harder, until you stop resisting altogether. You're not bad at making decisions. You're being denied the space to make real ones. Because when someone robs you of time, they're not asking for your choice. They're stealing your freedom to make it. Weaponize forgiveness. Weaponized forgiveness is not about healing. It's about control disguised as grace. It's when a manipulator offers forgiveness not to release tension, but to tighten their grip. They forgive loudly, publicly, prematurely, not to move forward, but to reframe the story, casting themselves as the merciful one while painting you as the transgressor. You may have disagreed, stood up for yourself, made a mistake, and instead of a conversation, they say, "It's okay, I forgive you," before you've asked, before you've even explained. And in that moment, the narrative shifts. Your pain becomes irrelevant, your position invalid, because now you are the one being forgiven. You are the one who's wrong. It sounds kind, it sounds mature, but inside it feels suffocating. You feel cornered into guilt, silenced by their premature absolution. They never acknowledge your side because forgiveness in their hands is not reconciliation, it's erasure. You're supposed to be grateful, relieved, but instead you feel robbed of your truth. Weaponized forgiveness is especially cruel because it flips morality on its head. If you push back, you look bitter, ungrateful, like someone who can't accept kindness. And so, you shrink, you submit, you apologize for wounds you didn't cause just to maintain peace, a peace built on your silence. Over time, this tactic rewrites reality. They become the hero, you become the burden, and every time they forgive you, they push you further from your voice, your strength, your self-respect, not with punishment, but with something far more powerful: false mercy. Confession. Pretexting confession. Pretexting is a deceptive tactic where manipulators use their own vulnerability, not to open up, but to open you up. It's when someone shares something raw, emotional, even dark, not to connect, but to bait you into revealing your secrets, your guilt, your past. Their confession isn't a gift, it's a key, and the moment you accept it, they're already unlocking you. They start with a whispered regret, a story of a mistake, a shameful moment from their past. "I've never told anyone this," they say, and you feel honored, trusted, special. You lean in, your guard drops, and in that emotional space, they ask, "Have you ever done something like that?" Now the spotlight is on you, and because they were vulnerable first, you feel compelled to match it. It feels mutual, but it's not. What you don't see is the calculation behind the timing, the tone, the specific nature of their story. It's designed to mirror your internal shame, to fish for your weaknesses. And once you confess, even a little, they hold on to it, not always to use immediately, but to store, for leverage, for control, for later. Confession pretexting works because it mimics intimacy, but instead of building trust, it harvests your truths. You walk away thinking the bond deepened. In reality, the power just shifted, and if you ever speak out against them, they'll remind you, "Don't forget what you told me," because what felt like a shared secret was really a trap door, and you're the one who stepped through it. Stress inoculation control. Stress inoculation control is the deliberate drip feeding of anxiety, chaos, and tension, not to break you, but to train you. It's a manipulation tactic that mimics psychological conditioning, where the manipulator slowly exposes you to controlled doses of stress until your threshold for discomfort rises, and your resistance, independence, and emotional awareness weaken. It doesn't start with a storm. It starts with a drizzle, a snide comment, a small lie, a canceled plan. You get frustrated, upset, but then it passes. They comfort you, laugh it off, or act like nothing happened. You forgive, you adjust, and then it happens again, slightly worse, just enough to sting, just enough to exhaust. You don't realize it yet, but you're being trained. Your nervous system begins to normalize dysfunction. What once made you panic now only tightens your jaw. What once triggered confrontation now triggers accommodation. You lower your expectations, not because you want to, but because stress becomes the new baseline, and every moment without conflict feels like a reward. This tactic creates emotional dependency. You begin to see peace not as a right, but as a gift only they can give. You praise them when they don't hurt you. You feel gratitude for moments of silence, and slowly you lose sight of what healthy even looks like. Stress inoculation control doesn't just make you tolerate mistreatment, it makes you need it to feel alive. Because once they've trained you to survive on scraps of calm, you'll stop searching for freedom. You'll beg for relief. Love withdrawal. Love withdrawal is emotional starvation with a smile. It's the act of pulling away affection, warmth, validation, and connection, not because of distance or conflict, but as punishment. A manipulator who uses love withdrawal doesn't need to raise their voice or say a cruel word. They just go quiet, they withhold, they freeze, and in the silence, you begin to unravel. One day, they're present, texting, touching, praising, loving you out loud. The next, they're cold, distant, unavailable. You ask what's wrong, they say nothing. You try harder. You replay your steps. Did I say too much? Did I ask for too much? The manipulator offers no clarity, just absence, and that absence creates panic. Love withdrawal is effective because it targets the primal part of you that needs attachment to feel safe. When someone you care about vanishes emotionally, it triggers alarm bells in your nervous system. You don't just miss them, you feel unsafe without their approval, their softness, their nearness, and they know it. They teach you to associate love with performance, with behavior, with obedience. So you start walking on eggshells. You silence your needs. You monitor your tone. You sacrifice pieces of yourself just to feel them thaw. And when the warmth returns, it feels like salvation. But it's not love returning. It's control being reestablished. Over time, you stop expecting love to be consistent. You start believing it must be earned back again and again. And that's how they keep you small, not by taking love away forever, but by making you beg for its return. Petty rule imposition. Petty rule imposition is the silent chokehold of control, masked as order, preference, or just how I like things. It's when a manipulator floods your daily life with a barrage of minor rules, routines, and rituals so small they feel too trivial to question. But the truth is, these rules are not about cleanliness, structure, or standards. They are about power, and every time you comply, you shrink. It begins with a correction. Don't put that there. That's not how I like my coffee. Can you please load the dishwasher this way? You oblige. It's minor. It's easier than arguing. But then come more rules about how you speak, how you dress, how you eat, when you sleep, what you say in front of others. Each one is small enough to dismiss, but together they form a maze with only one path, the one they approve of. You start tiptoeing through your own life, anticipating reactions, self-correcting, over-apologizing. You don't realize it, but you're being reshaped, not with screams or threats, but with sighs, looks, and sigh-coded rules that train you to make yourself smaller for the sake of harmony. Petty rule imposition works because it appears rational, reasonable, even innocent. And if you push back, you look difficult, overly sensitive, disrespectful. But the goal was never harmony. It was obedience, control disguised as routine. Because once you're used to surrendering the little things, it doesn't take much to surrender yourself entirely. One petty rule at a time. Contradictory praise. Contradictory praise is a manipulation tactic that cloaks criticism in compliments, confusing your self-perception while keeping you hooked on their approval. It's when a manipulator gives you praise that feels good on the surface but cuts underneath, a smile with an edge, a compliment with a bruise. You walk away unsure whether you've just been lifted up or knocked down. They say things like, "You're way smarter than you act sometimes," or "You look great when you actually put effort in." On paper, it sounds like validation, but in your gut, something twists, because with every praise comes a shadow, a reminder that your worth is conditional, your value unstable. You begin to crave the full approval they never quite give. You start chasing a version of yourself they subtly imply exists, one you've never fully measured up to. This tactic works because it engages your hope and your insecurity at the same time. The praise pulls you closer. The contradiction keeps you unsure. You think, if I can just do a little better, maybe they'll stop pointing out what's wrong. You become addicted to almost being enough. Over time, this rewires your self-worth. You start measuring yourself through their mixed signals. You wait for their praise, not because it affirms you, but because it momentarily silences your shame. But it never lasts. That's the trap. They praise just enough to keep you reaching, never enough to let you rest. And so you stay, not because they make you feel great, but because they make you feel like someday you finally might. Subtext, signaling, subtext. Signaling is the art of saying everything without saying anything. It's the weaponization of implication, tone, glances, and pauses to control a conversation while maintaining perfect deniability. A manipulator using this tactic never tells you outright what they mean. They suggest, they hint, they let you feel it, and then deny it ever happened. They don't call you selfish, they sigh when you speak about your needs. They don't tell you to shut up, they look at their phone mid-sentence. They don't accuse you, they just say, "Interesting," with that tilt in their voice that makes your stomach twist. Every interaction becomes a puzzle you're desperate to solve, and every piece they give you is designed to lead you to the conclusion they want you to reach, all while they maintain the illusion of innocence. Subtext signaling works because it bypasses your logic and hits your gut. It's deeply emotional. You feel disapproved of, but can't prove it. You sense you've done something wrong, but there are no words to challenge. So you adapt. You tone yourself down. You explain yourself more. You shrink, not because of what they said, but because of what they made you feel between the lines. And if you ever call it out, they smile and ask, "What are you talking about?" You start to wonder if you imagined it. You start to doubt your own intuition. That's the power of subtext signaling. It makes you carry the weight of their judgment, while they stand back and pretend their hands are clean. Coercive silence. Coercive silence is a brutal form of emotional control that punishes not through words, but through absence. It's the calculated, deliberate decision to say nothing when something desperately needs to be said. It's not about needing space. It's about using silence as a weapon to intimidate, destabilize, and dominate. The manipulator doesn't walk away to cool down. They vanish emotionally to make you squirm. You ask a question, no answer. You express a fear, no response. You cry, still nothing. Their silence is louder than shouting because it forces you to fill in the blanks. You begin to spiral. Did I say too much? Am I being dramatic? Are they done with me? You try to fix it, to apologize for things you haven't done, because silence this thick, this cold, this calculated doesn't feel like distance. It feels like abandonment. Coercive silence is engineered to create anxiety. The manipulator knows that the longer they withhold, the more desperate you become. It creates a power imbalance. You chase, they withhold. You submit, they regain control. And when they finally speak again, the silence breaks like a spell. You're grateful, relieved. But that gratitude is not healing. It's submission. This silence isn't peace. It's punishment. It's used to derail arguments they can't win, to avoid accountability they don't want to face, and to erase your voice by forcing you into emotional desperation. And over time, you learn the most damaging lesson of all, that your pain, your truth, your presence can be met with nothing, and that somehow you're the one who has to make it right. Reality substitution. Reality substitution is a manipulation tactic that doesn't argue with your truth. It replaces it. It's the systematic rewriting of your memories, your feelings, and your lived experiences with a version crafted by the manipulator. They don't scream that you're wrong. They calmly, confidently, relentlessly narrate a different reality until you begin to doubt your own. It starts with corrections. That's not how it happened. You misunderstood. You're remembering it wrong. You hesitate. Maybe they're right. You try to recall things clearly, but your memory is already under attack. So you defer. You let them fill in the gaps. And what they give you isn't your story. It's theirs. Their motives, their innocence, their justification. Slowly, what you felt becomes an overreaction. What you saw becomes a misunderstanding. What hurt you becomes nothing. This tactic doesn't just gaslight, it rewrites the emotional script. They tell you how you should have felt. You weren't upset, you were just tired. That didn't scare you, you were just surprised. And with every retelling, you lose another piece of certainty. You start to say things like, maybe I misread it, maybe I made it worse than it was. But what's happening isn't forgetfulness, it's psychological theft. Reality substitution is terrifying because it unroots you. You begin to feel like a stranger to your own life. You doubt your instincts. You stop trusting your memory. And soon, you stop resisting altogether. Not because you agree with them, but because you no longer remember what it felt like to disagree. Phased disempowerment. Phased disempowerment is the slow, systematic erosion of your autonomy, executed in stages so subtle you barely notice it happening until you've surrendered everything. A manipulator using this tactic doesn't demand control all at once. They chip away at your confidence, your independence, your sense of self in quiet, calculated doses until there's nothing left to resist them with. It starts with help. They offer to take care of the little things, making decisions, handling details, speaking on your behalf because it's easier. At first, it feels loving, supportive, like they're lifting burdens, but what they're really doing is conditioning you to step back. You begin to defer, not because you're incapable, but because they've made it more convenient not to act. Then come the subtle doubts. Are you sure that's the best idea? Or, you're usually not great with that kind of thing. You laugh it off. You internalize it. You start asking for permission where you used to act on instinct. Your voice softens. Your choices feel riskier. You hesitate, not because you failed, but because they've made you afraid to try. The final phase is dependency. You wake up realizing you don't make decisions without checking with them. You second-guess your own instincts. You can't remember when you last stood your ground. They've made themselves your anchor, but in doing so, they've tied you to the bottom. Phase disempowerment doesn't break you loudly. It rewrites you quietly until the person you were is only visible in the spaces they haven't filled. Judgment framing. Judgment framing is the quiet shaping of your choices, thoughts, and emotions through implied disapproval. It's not direct condemnation. It's the subtle positioning of certain behaviors as good, respectable, or mature, while anything outside that frame is painted as foolish, dramatic, selfish, or weak. The manipulator never tells you what to do. They just make you afraid of what it would mean if you did anything else. It begins with tone, a look, a pause after you speak. They say, "I'd never do that, but that's just me." Or, "Some people just don't think things through." They talk about others in ways that plant seeds. "She totally overreacted, don't you think?" You nod, wanting to stay on the right side of their approval. And just like that, the walls of acceptable behavior are built. You begin filtering yourself. You don't want to be one of those people. You pre-edit your emotions, your opinions, your boundaries, just to avoid being the next person's silently judge. They never say you're wrong, but they've made it clear what right looks like, and it just happens to be whatever aligns with them. This tactic weaponizes your need to be seen as good. It makes you choose compliance, not out of fear, but out of a desire to belong, to be admired, to avoid the quiet coldness of their disappointment. Judgment framing doesn't chain you. It builds an invisible cage around your dignity and then hands you the key just to watch you lock the door yourself. Reverse gaslighting. Reverse gaslighting is psychological warfare wrapped in praise. It's when a manipulator convinces you that your instincts, doubts, or discomforts are not just wrong, but symptoms of your own brilliance, growth, or strength. They don't deny your reality by attacking it. They reframe it into something positive, something you'll be too flattered or too proud to question. You express concern, and they say, "That's just your powerful mind overanalyzing. Most people wouldn't even catch that." You sense manipulation, and they respond, "That's because you see patterns others don't. You're intense, intuitive, rare. Suddenly, your red flags become badges of honor. Your unease is turned into a virtue, and you stop trusting the warning signals your own body is screaming, because the manipulator has rebranded your fear as insight. This tactic works because it disarms you with validation. You feel seen, celebrated, even special. But beneath that praise lies a trap. Your boundaries get erased under the illusion of depth. Your suspicion becomes your ego. Your resistance transforms into self-doubt, but in disguise. You begin to override your gut because you think you're too enlightened to fall for manipulation. Over time, you abandon self-protection in favor of self-flattery. You start believing that questioning the manipulator means questioning your own elevated awareness, and so you stay, convinced that your suffering is just the price of being extraordinary. Reverse gaslighting doesn't make you feel crazy, it makes you feel wise, and in doing so, It ensures that when the truth finally breaks through, you won't just grieve what they did to you. You'll grieve that you were the one who explained it all away. Attention seeding. Attention seeding is the manipulation of perception through carefully planted signals, subtle words, gestures, or behaviors designed to draw focus, spark curiosity, and provoke emotional pursuit. The manipulator doesn't demand your attention. They invite it indirectly, artfully, in a way that makes you feel like you chose to give it. But every seed they plant is a hook, and once you're caught, you start chasing them without realizing it. They drop hints about something they're not ready to talk about. They glance at their phone and smirk. They change their mood suddenly and offer no explanation. They post vague messages meant to be seen by you, but never addressed. These acts are not random. They are crafted to stimulate your curiosity, to make you ask, what's going on? Are they okay? Did I do something wrong? The power of attention seeding lies in its ambiguity. It's not a plea for help. It's not a cry for attention. It's something between, something you can't quite name but can't ignore. You find yourself emotionally invested, even obsessed with understanding them, with fixing something that may not even be broken, with earning a response that was designed to stay just out of reach. This tactic rewires the dynamic. Suddenly, you're the one pursuing. You're the one anxious. You're the one waiting for validation. And they stay distant, cool, in control, because they never asked for your attention. They just made you want to give it, and then punished you for needing it returned. Superiority conditioning. Superiority conditioning is the slow, calculated process of training you to see the manipulator as inherently above you, more logical, more mature, more capable, more right. It's not about outright domination. It's about creating a dynamic where you reflexively defer, diminish yourself, and second-guess your own judgment because you've been conditioned to believe they simply know better. It starts with subtle corrections. They finish your sentences. They explain things you already understand. They interrupt to clarify your point in front of others. They roll their eyes when you get emotional, then calmly present their version of the facts. You begin to feel clumsy around them, uncertain, childlike, and they never call you dumb, but they don't need to. The hierarchy has already been established. They reward submission with warmth, affection, approval. The more you agree with them, the more praise you receive. But disagreement is met with condescension, a sigh, a smirk, a long pause before they help you understand. You start to filter your thoughts. You edit your instincts. You become quiet, not because you don't have a voice, but because you've been trained to believe theirs is more important. Superiority conditioning doesn't just control your actions. It rewires your self-worth. You begin to rely on them for answers, for interpretation, for permission, and over time, your inner authority dissolves. You stop asking, "What do I think?" You start asking, "What would they say?" Because somewhere along the way, you stopped believing that being equal was even possible. Strategic victimhood. Strategic victimhood is a calculated performance where the manipulator positions themselves as the wounded, misunderstood, or oppressed party, not to seek healing, but to seize power. It's the act of weaponizing suffering, real or fabricated, to deflect accountability, elicit guilt, and control the emotional landscape of the relationship. They don't seek resolution, they seek leverage. When confronted, they don't answer, they hurt. "I can't believe you'd say that after everything I've been through. You know how hard things are for me." They cry when you express a boundary, collapse when you ask for truth. The moment they feel exposed, they retreat into pain and make you the aggressor. It flips the script. Now you're defending yourself for having dared to confront their behavior. This tactic is not weakness, it's strategy. Because the victim holds moral power, they become untouchable, and any challenge to their narrative becomes cruelty. You backpedal, you soften, you start holding your own emotions hostage just to avoid hurting them further. Soon, their suffering becomes the center of every conversation, every decision, every moment. There is no space left for your pain, no room for your truth. Strategic victimhood feeds on your empathy. It turns your compassion into chains. It makes you feel responsible for their healing, while they do nothing to heal. It uses your conscience against you until you feel like the villain for needing love, honesty, or respect. And the more you try to save them, the deeper you sink into the guilt they built just for you. Punitive patience. Punitive patience is a manipulation tactic cloaked in calm. It's the quiet, controlled stillness a manipulator uses to punish you, not by reacting, but by waiting. Waiting for you to crack, waiting for you to correct yourself, waiting for you to break under the weight of their silence and inaction. They don't lash out. They don't explain. They just sit there, stoic, composed, unreadable. And that stillness becomes a cage. You bring up a concern, and instead of engaging, they go still. You confess something emotional, and they blink, breathe, and respond with a measured pause. They let your words hang in the air, thick with judgment, while they maintain the appearance of emotional control. But their patience isn't peace, it's pressure, a weaponized delay designed to make you feel childish, irrational, too much. This tactic works because it inverts the roles. They become the reasonable one, the one who listens and doesn't explode. And you start to feel like the unstable one, the overreactor, the emotional liability. You begin to apologize for your tone, your timing, your tears, not because you were wrong, but because their lack of reaction made you feel like you were. Punitive patience is restraint used to dominate. It's not for understanding. It's for superiority. It's how they make you do the emotional labor for them. Question yourself, calm yourself, fix the discomfort they cause. And the cruelest part is, no one else sees it as abuse. They just see someone who handles things maturely. But you know the truth. You weren't met with grace. You were met with silence that screamed, learn your place. Choice restriction. Choice restriction is the quiet architecture of control, where the manipulator doesn't take away your freedom, they simply rearrange it so that the only reasonable choice left is the one that benefits them. It's the psychological illusion of autonomy, a carefully curated menu of options that narrows your path without you even noticing. You think you're deciding, but you're only choosing from the traps they've set. They present ultimatums masked as logic. You can either stay and work this out, or leave and throw everything away. You're either loyal to me, or you're part of the problem. None of these are fair, none of them are real choices, but they're framed in a way that makes refusal feel irrational, heartless, or shameful. This tactic works because it mimics the structure of free will. It makes you feel like you're in control, when really you're being funneled toward one outcome. And every time you comply, your inner resistance weakens. You stop asking what you want and start trying to pick the least damaging option they've allowed. You normalize sacrificing your needs just to keep peace, just to avoid being blamed. Over time, your world shrinks. You feel stuck, confused, exhausted. But when you try to explain, it sounds like nothing. They gave me a choice, you say. But what you don't see is the walls around you weren't built all at once. They were built door by door, each one slightly smaller than the last. And now, even when you're holding the handle, you're not sure what freedom looks like anymore. Delayed disappointment. Delayed disappointment is the slow drip poison of emotional manipulation, a tactic where the manipulator withholds their true dissatisfaction until the moment it hurts the most. They pretend to be fine. They smile. They say it's okay. They let the moment pass. But the disappointment doesn't disappear. It waits. It grows. And then it arrives, not in anger, but in silence, in distance, in a sudden chill that leaves you questioning everything. You thought it went well. You believed the issue was resolved. They nodded. They reassured. But hours later, sometimes days, you feel it, the cold shoulder, the lack of warmth in their voice, the passive-aggressive pause before a sentence. You ask if something's wrong and they respond, "It's fine. Don't worry about it." But the shift is undeniable. This tactic is psychological sabotage. It leaves you emotionally disoriented. You start to review everything you said, everything you did, wondering where the hidden landmine was. And because the feedback comes so late and so vaguely, you can't defend yourself. You can only doubt yourself. Delayed disappointment is designed to teach obedience through fear of disapproval you can't predict. You begin to anticipate their reactions before they even happen. You tiptoe around your own truth. You apologize first, just in case. And eventually, you live in a constant state of preemptive guilt, trying to avoid punishment that hasn't even arrived yet. They don't need to yell. They just need you to fear their silence tomorrow more than your voice today. Double validation trap. The double validation trap is a psychological snare that demands you constantly affirm both yourself and the manipulator, while they offer neither in return. It's the exhausting loop where every feeling you express must be justified, explained, and softened so it doesn't upset them, while also being twisted into an opportunity to validate their perspective. You don't just have to be right, you have to be agreeably right, or not at all. You speak up about being hurt, and they respond, "I can see how you feel that way, but don't forget how much I've been dealing with." You voice a need, and they say, "I'm trying my best. Why don't you ever see that?" Suddenly, your pain becomes a test. To be heard, you must also comfort. To be believed, you must first believe them. It's emotional gymnastics, where the cost of being understood is denying a part of your own truth. This trap is especially effective because it appeals to your empathy. You think, maybe I should see their side too, even when you're the one bleeding. You start overthinking every word, checking your tone, ensuring you don't make them feel attacked, while your own emotions sit quietly in the corner, waiting their turn, a turn that never comes. Over time, this dynamic turns expression into labor. You don't ask for much, not because you don't need it, but because it's too exhausting to ask the right way. And the manipulator, they never have to validate you. They've trained you to do both jobs, yours and theirs, so you become your own comfort while carrying the weight of someone else's ego on your back. Trust hijacking. Trust hijacking is the psychological theft of your deepest instinct, your willingness to believe. It's the act of gaining your trust quickly, intensely, and purposefully, only to use it as a weapon against you. The manipulator doesn't earn your trust over time. They speedrun it. They shower you with vulnerability, praise, relatability. They mirror your values. They finish your thoughts. They make you feel like you've known them forever. And in that rush of connection, you surrender. You tell them things you've never told anyone. You let them in. You relax your guard. And that's when the trap begins. Because every secret you share, every fear you expose, every part of yourself you reveal, it's not safe in their hands. It's stored, filed, weaponized for control, guilt, leverage, silence. Trust hijacking exploits your humanity, your desire to connect, your need to feel seen. It creates a false bond so strong that by the time you feel the sting of betrayal, you're already emotionally indebted. You defend them to others. You justify red flags. You question yourself instead of them because you trusted them too quickly, too deeply, and now to question them is to question you. And when they finally use your own truth against you, mocking your past, twisting your words, turning your pain into ammunition, you feel ashamed not just for being hurt, but for letting them in. They didn't break your trust. They convinced you to hand it over, gift-wrapped, and then they crushed it while looking you in the eyes, still pretending they never would. Echo conditioning. Echo conditioning is a subtle manipulation tactic that trains you to crave approval and modify your behavior based on how often your thoughts, words, or emotions are echoed back to you. The manipulator doesn't control you with commands. They control you with selective repetition, praise when you say what they like, silence when you don't, agreement when you mirror them, indifference when you show independence. It starts innocently. You express an idea and they nod, repeat it back, maybe even say, exactly. It feels good, safe. So the next time you adjust your words to match what earned that echo, you begin to sync with them, not out of fear, but out of a hunger to be seen. But when you express discomfort, challenge them, or speak from a raw place that doesn't flatter their narrative, nothing. A pause, a quick subject change, sometimes a cold smile, no echo, no return. Your nervous system registers it before your brain does, that quiet disapproval, that absence of affirmation. So you self-correct, again and again, until your words become theirs, your emotions become edited, your truth becomes secondhand. This tactic doesn't raise alarms. It feels like bonding, like compatibility. But what's really happening is behavioral shaping. You're being trained like an instrument, played only when your notes match their melody. Over time, your identity begins to dissolve beneath layers of approval-seeking responses. Echo conditioning doesn't steal your voice. It teaches you to abandon it, just to hear a sound come back. Feedback starvation. Feedback starvation is the quiet suffocation of your self-worth, achieved not through criticism, but through silence. It's the deliberate withholding of emotional, verbal, or behavioral responses that leaves you in a state of chronic uncertainty. A manipulator using this tactic won't insult you. They won't praise you either. They simply say nothing, offer nothing, react to nothing. And in that void, you begin to question everything. You try to impress, and they blink. You open up, and they nod. You express love, and they simply move on. There's no warmth, no recognition, no closure, just the aching sense that your words fell into a black hole. Over time, your need for affirmation becomes desperation. You overperform, overexplain, overgive, all in hopes of a glance, a word, a sign that you matter. But nothing comes, and that's the design. Feedback starvation doesn't scold you, it starves you of clarity, of connection, of identity. It teaches you to measure your worth through absence. You begin to feel invisible, not because you are, but because someone made the conscious choice to treat you that way. And yet, you stay, because your hope, the hope that maybe this time they'll respond, is the hook that keeps you chasing their approval like oxygen. This tactic is devastating because it depletes you slowly. It doesn't scream abuse, it whispers nothing. And in the silence, you collapse inward, wondering if you're too much or not enough. But the truth is, you're not the problem. You're the one being denied the most basic human need, to be seen, heard, acknowledged, and loved out loud. Strategic infantilization. Strategic infantilization is the manipulative art of keeping you small under the guise of love, protection, or concern. It's when a person systematically undermines your competence, independence, and confidence by treating you as if you're incapable, fragile, or irresponsible. They don't belittle you with cruelty, they coddle you with control, and slowly your life begins to shrink inside the box they've built. They say things like, "Let me handle that," "It's too much for you," or "I just worry." You make impulsive decisions. You're offered help you didn't ask for, guidance you didn't need, doubt where you once had certainty. At first, it feels caring, nurturing, but over time, it becomes suffocating. You stop offering ideas because they're always not quite right. You stop acting on your own because you're used to them stepping in. Eventually, you start to question your ability to function without their input. This tactic is most effective in long-term relationships, romantic, familial, even professional, where one person gradually assumes the role of the wise protector, and the other becomes the well-meaning but helpless partner. It feels safe, but it's not safety, it's sabotage, because the goal isn't to support you, it's to keep you dependent, contained, manageable. Strategic infantilization convinces you that your instincts are flawed, your autonomy dangerous, your growth optional, and when you finally try to reclaim your power, they look at you with sad eyes and say, "Why are you acting like this? I'm only trying to help." But help isn't help when it requires you to stay powerless just to keep their love. Faux accountability. Faux accountability is the masterstroke of illusion, a manipulative tactic where someone pretends to take responsibility not to repair the damage, but to protect their image, reset the power dynamic, or silence your anger. It sounds like growth, it looks like maturity, but it's hollow, a performance, and its purpose isn't healing, it's disarming you. They say, "I know I've made mistakes," but never name them. They admit they could have handled things better, but never specify how. They tell you they're working on themselves, but their behavior never changes, and in the moments when you finally push back, they beat you to it. "I've already admitted I was wrong. What more do you want? Now you're the one who's unreasonable. Now you look like the one who can't let things go." This tactic poisons your ability to trust your own pain. You begin to question your right to be upset. After all, they apologize, right? Shouldn't that be enough? But what you don't realize is that their accountability was never about making amends. It was a shortcut, a script, a strategic confession designed to pacify you, reset the emotional playing field, and stop the conversation before it ever truly began. Over time, you learn that the words, "I'm sorry," can be a muzzle, that a person can say all the right things and mean none of them. You stop expecting change, you start settling for acknowledgement, and worst of all, you begin to doubt whether your pain ever needed justice in the first place. Faux transparency. Faux transparency is a masterful manipulation tactic where the manipulator pretends to bare their soul, not to build trust, but to manufacture it. They share details, confessions, and truths so openly, so freely, that you drop your guard. You think, "They're being honest, so I can be too." But what you don't realize is that their honesty is curated, timed, and strategically incomplete. It's not vulnerability. It's a weapon dressed as truth. They'll tell you about a traumatic childhood, a past mistake, a time they were hurt or betrayed. It feels intimate, raw. You feel honored to be let in. But what they've shared is often rehearsed, filtered, and emotionally distant. The goal isn't connection, it's control. They've shown you just enough to earn your trust, but never enough to threaten their image. And while you're spilling your whole truth in return, they've only handed you a polished excerpt of theirs. This illusion of openness gives them the upper hand. When conflict arises, they can say, "I've always been honest with you," or "I don't hide anything." And it sounds true because you remember their stories, but you don't realize how carefully those stories were chosen, how each one served to make them look brave, broken, or misunderstood, never manipulative, never flawed in a way that costs them power. Faux transparency disarms you with performance. It turns secrets into currency, and by the time you realize you were speaking to a mirror, reflecting only what they wanted you to see, you've already given them all of you, for a version of them that never really existed. Anticipatory framing. Anticipatory framing is the psychological preloading of perception, a manipulation tactic where the manipulator tells you how to feel, what to expect, or how to interpret a situation before it happens. It's not just control over the moment, it's control over your reality in advance. They don't wait for your reaction. They give it to you. They plant it. And you start to question your instincts before they even rise. They say things like, "I know you're going to overreact to this, bye," or "You'll probably think I'm the bad guy, but," or "You always take things the wrong way, so just hear me out." These phrases aren't just protective, they're predictive. They don't just shape the conversation, they trap you in it, because the second you respond naturally, Confused, hurt, angry, they hold up the mirror and say, "See, just like I said." This tactic forces you to perform emotional correctness. You start suppressing real reactions just to avoid confirming their expectations. You become so focused on disproving the frame they gave you, needy, jealous, dramatic, sensitive, that you lose sight of whether the issue actually deserved your reaction. And that's the genius of it. You stop defending your truth and start defending your image. Anticipatory framing makes you feel like you're always failing someone else's test. It convinces you to pre-edit your emotions. It turns your self-expression into damage control. And slowly, you abandon your authenticity, not because you don't feel things, but because someone taught you to fear what they'd say if you did. Halo implanting is the manipulative act of manufacturing a glowing image of oneself early on, so brightly, so flawlessly, that every action afterward is filtered through that artificial light. It's not just about making a good impression. It's about engineering admiration so thoroughly that even their red flags look golden in your eyes. The manipulator doesn't just earn your trust. They install themselves in your psyche as inherently good, noble, special. They begin with exaggerated generosity, thoughtfulness, charm. They listen with focused eyes. They remember details. They go out of their way for you. They speak about values, dreams, and their deep flaws with a rawness that feels like vulnerability. But it's performance, a carefully crafted mythology. You don't fall for them by accident. You're led, moment by moment, gesture by gesture, into reverence. And once that halo is in place, they use it, subtly. They make a cruel comment, and you justify it. They didn't mean it like that. They ignore your feelings, and you rationalize. They're just stressed. You begin editing reality to match the glowing figure you first met. Their goodness becomes your default assumption, even as their actions contradict it. This tactic is lethal because it turns your loyalty into blindness. You defend them to others. You silence your intuition. You believe in the person they presented, even when the one standing in front of you no longer resembles that at all. Halo implanting doesn't earn love. It hijacks perception. And once the illusion is rooted, you'll trust their intentions long after they've shown you they never deserve the benefit of your doubt. Disguised ultimatums. Disguised ultimatums are the velvet-wrapped threats of psychological control. They don't sound like "do this or else." They sound like "I just don't know if I can handle this anymore," or "I really need someone who understands me better." These aren't requests. They're ultimatums buried in emotion, twisted into guilt, and disguised as vulnerability. The pressure doesn't come through force. It comes through implication, and that implication is loud. The manipulator never asks outright. They never take direct responsibility for what they're demanding. Instead, they present you with a fork in the road and pretend it's your idea to walk the one that leads to your surrender. They make compliance feel like compassion and resistance feel like abandonment. You want to say no, but you're afraid of what that no means. Will they leave? Will they get cold? Will they punish you with distance, silence, disappointment? So you choose the right path, not because you agree, but because you're scared of the consequences they never clearly stated, yet made unmistakably real. Disguised ultimatums are designed to bypass accountability. If you later confront them, they'll say, "I never told you to do that," or "You're the one who decided," and technically, they're right, but emotionally, they tied the leash. Over time, you stop making choices from your core. You start making choices from fear, because when threats are wrapped in softness, you don't see the blade until you're already bleeding. Rejection priming. Rejection priming is the psychological rigging of your emotions, where a manipulator subtly plants the fear of abandonment, exclusion, or emotional withdrawal to make you more pliable, obedient, and desperate for approval. It's not open rejection. It's the possibility of it, the tension, The hints, the silence that makes your stomach drop before anything has even been said. It's the ghost of rejection haunting your every move. It starts with small shifts, a pause too long before a reply, a cold glance, a joking comment like, "You're lucky I put up with you." You brush it off, but inside, you start recalibrating, changing your tone, softening your opinions, minimizing your needs, all in the hope that you'll stay good enough to keep their warmth. And just like that, they've trained you to dance for closeness and tiptoe around disapproval. What makes rejection priming so powerful is its unpredictability. You never know when the coldness will come. It keeps you in a low-grade state of anxiety, scanning constantly for signs that you're being pushed away. And when they do re-engage, offer affection, or give praise, it feels euphoric because you thought you lost it. That relief becomes addictive. Over time, you stop expressing anything that might trigger withdrawal. You silence your truths. You prioritize their comfort over your reality, not because they told you to, but because they didn't have to. Rejection priming doesn't use the pain of abandonment to control you. It uses the threat of it. And once you fear losing them more than losing yourself, you're already theirs. Secrecy bonding is the manipulative creation of intimacy through shared silence. It's when a manipulator pulls you into a private world, inviting you to keep secrets, not for trust, but for control. They whisper things no one else knows. They confide in you about others. They tell you, "I shouldn't even be saying this." And suddenly, you feel chosen, special, bound to them. But that closeness isn't connection, it's a leash. The secrets feel sacred at first. You become their confidant, their safe space. And because you've been entrusted, you feel obligated to protect them. But what you don't see is that these secrets come with unspoken rules. You can't tell anyone. You can't ask too many questions. You can't expose them because now you're involved. You become complicit, even if you never agreed to be. Then comes the reversal. You share your secrets in return. It feels mutual, but it's not, because yours get stored, filed, measured, used, and now the same silence that once made you feel special becomes a cage. You can't leave without fear. You can't speak out without guilt. You're not protecting them anymore. You're protecting yourself from what exposing them would reveal about you. Secrecy bonding isn't built on trust. It's built on entanglement. You don't feel safe because they've let you in. You feel trapped because you don't know how to get out without losing everything they made you believe was real. Social leverage traps. Social leverage traps are manipulative power plays built on your relationships, your reputation, and the fear of public perception. The manipulator doesn't threaten you directly. They subtly weaponize the people around you. They drop hints. They plant seeds. They curate what others see. And suddenly, the room feels rigged, even if no one said a word. It starts quietly. They tell your secrets in confidence to mutual friends. They frame stories with themselves as the rational one and you as unstable, over-emotional, difficult. They say things like, "Others have noticed it too," or "I haven't told anyone yet." These aren't just words, they're pressure, emotional blackmail dressed in suggestion. You begin to question who's safe, who's listening, who already sees you differently. This tactic turns your own community into a minefield. Every conversation feels like it might be an echo chamber of their version of events. Every silence feels like judgment. You become hyper-aware of your image, trying to correct what's been distorted, all while knowing you can't trace the damage. It's psychological suffocation, fighting a narrative you never got to write. The worst part? If you push back too hard, they paint you as paranoid, dramatic. "No one thinks that," they'll say, while carefully making sure everyone does. Social leverage traps isolate you in plain sight. You're not alone, but you feel abandoned, not silenced, but unheard. Because when someone turns your social world against you, you stop speaking freely, not because you can't, but because you don't know who's already listening with their loyalty bought and your truth sold. Credential smuggling. Credential smuggling is the manipulation of perception through subtle, strategic self-promotion. It's when a person inserts authority, expertise, or status into conversations, not to inform, but to dominate. They don't flaunt their credentials openly. They leak them quietly, casually, always at the perfect moment. And the message is clear: I know more than you. Don't question me. They'll drop lines like, when I was consulting with big name company, or back when I was working on my PhD, or most people don't know this, but I've actually studied this extensively. They present these facts as harmless background, but the timing reveals their intent. It always comes when you express doubt, assert your opinion, or begin to stand your ground. It's not a contribution, it's a muzzle. The brilliance of credential smuggling is in its subtlety. It's not overt arrogance, it's suggestion. They don't tell you to stop talking. They just make you feel like you're out of your depth if you keep going. You start to pull back. You second-guess your ideas. You defer, not because you're wrong, but because you've been made to feel unqualified to even try being right. Over time, this tactic creates an unspoken hierarchy. They lead, you follow. They instruct, you absorb. You stop challenging. You stop contributing fully. You shrink, not because they told you to, but because they whispered just enough to make your voice feel small. Credential smuggling doesn't seek conversation. It seeks control, wrapped in just enough credibility to keep you silent. Envy induction. Envy induction is a cold, calculated manipulation tactic designed to make you feel less than by showcasing what you're not getting, who you're not becoming, or what others seem to have that you don't. It's the strategic triggering of inadequacy. The manipulator doesn't attack your worth directly. They make you watch it be outshined, and then they watch you shrink under the weight of comparison. They do it with stories. She's been so supportive lately, nothing like what I've dealt with in the past. They do it with timing, laughing at messages in front of you, praising others' achievements right after dismissing yours. They post cryptic captions, highlight curated moments of joy, drop subtle brags masked as casual updates. The message is always clear, though never spoken aloud. Look at what they're getting. Look at what you're missing. This tactic feeds on your insecurities. It's not about admiration, it's about subtraction. The more you look outward, the less you trust inward. You start chasing validation. You try harder to please. You question your value. You compare your effort to their silence and wonder what's wrong with you. And the manipulator? They offer no reassurance because your self-doubt keeps you compliant. Envy induction doesn't build desire. It builds desperation. It makes you compete in a game you never agreed to play, all while convincing you that your hunger for their approval is your own fault, and that someone else, somewhere, is simply doing it better. Jealousy triangulation. Jealousy triangulation is the emotional bait and switch that manipulates you by making you compete for what should already be yours: attention, affection, value. It's when a manipulator introduces a third person, real or imagined, into the dynamic, not to connect, but to provoke. They mention how funny someone else is, how helpful, how attractive, how easy to talk to, and suddenly you're no longer in a relationship, you're in a silent contest. The third person doesn't have to be present. Sometimes it's an ex, a coworker, a friend, a stranger online. What matters is how the manipulator uses them as a tool to destabilize your sense of security. They watch your reaction closely. If you question them, you're insecure. If you ignore it, they escalate. They flirt. They bring the name up more. They paint subtle comparisons you can't win. And all the while, they maintain innocence. I don't know why you're so jealous. Jealousy triangulation turns your emotions into the problem. Your fear, your anger, your sadness, not their behavior, not their manipulation. You begin to feel ashamed for even reacting. You start policing your feelings, shrinking your voice, trying to stay cool enough to remain chosen. And that's the hook. They want you chasing. They want you uncertain, because the more you fight for their attention, the more power they gain. You become addicted to proving your worth, one subtle rejection at a time. But it's not love when you're always auditioning. It's not intimacy when someone invites you into a triangle and makes you feel lucky to still be standing in the corner. Surprise morality shifts. Surprise morality shifts are psychological ambushes, manipulative moments where the rules of what's right or wrong suddenly change without warning, leaving you confused, ashamed, and scrambling to adjust. The manipulator doesn't hold consistent values, they hold leverage, and their sense of morality is flexible, used only when it benefits them and discarded the moment it doesn't. One day, they praise you for being honest. The next, they shame you for oversharing. They mock someone for being too emotional, then accuse you of being cold-hearted. They lie and laugh it off. But if you hide something, they frame it as betrayal. Their standards shift like shadows, and you're expected to adapt instantly or be cast as the one in the wrong. This tactic works because it destabilizes your internal compass. You begin to question your instincts. Your certainty fades. You no longer know which version of them you're speaking to. You find yourself tiptoeing through every interaction, trying to avoid unknowable landmines. But there's no winning, because the goal was never fairness. The goal was confusion. In surprise morality shifts, guilt is the weapon. You feel punished for behaviors that were once celebrated. You shrink, apologize, compensate, not because you did something wrong, but because you're desperate to stay on their good side, even when that side keeps moving. Eventually, you stop asking what's right. You just ask, what won't get me punished today? And that's when they've won, because you're no longer guided by your values. You're guided by theirs, even when they change the rules mid-game. Subtle rank imposition. Subtle rank imposition is the quiet assertion of dominance without ever declaring superiority aloud. It's a manipulation tactic where someone positions themselves as emotionally, intellectually, or morally above you, not through argument, but through tone, timing, and suggestion. They don't need to tell you they're better. They make you feel it. They'll speak last in conversations as if their words are the conclusion. They'll interrupt you with soft corrections, then continue like nothing happened. They'll subtly pause before responding to your ideas long enough to signal doubt. In group settings, they refer to your thoughts as interesting, but not valid. They smile when you make mistakes. They explain things you already know, not to help, but to reinforce your place. Over time, you begin to shrink around them, not because they've criticized you outright, but because they've trained you to see yourself as less competent, less informed, less valuable. You start looking for their approval before speaking. You second-guess your knowledge. You adapt your tone to theirs, quieter, more careful, less certain. This tactic works best on people who are empathetic, self-aware, or humble, because you're more likely to reflect than retaliate, and they count on that. They rely on your politeness to keep the dynamic unchallenged. Subtle rank imposition is hierarchy without a crown. It's power without permission. And if you don't name it, you'll slowly forget that you were ever equal to begin with. Manipulative nostalgia. Manipulative nostalgia is the emotional hijacking of your past, where a manipulator reaches into your memories, pulls out the moments that once made you feel safe, loved, or alive, and uses them to trap you in the present. It's not about cherishing the good times, it's about weaponizing them, turning joy into guilt, turning comfort into compliance. They say, remember how good things used to be? When you're trying to express pain, we were so perfect back then, right after hurting you. They remind you of your laughter together, your firsts, your moments of connection, not to relive them, but to erase what you're feeling now. They summon the sweetest parts of your history and hold them up like proof. This is what we are. This is who I am. Don't ruin it. and you hesitate because yes, those moments were real. The memories flood in, the warmth, the music, the long talks, the inside jokes. You begin to doubt your own anger. You wonder if you're being too harsh, too emotional, too forgetful. But you're not. You're being manipulated through sentiment. Manipulative nostalgia reframes the past, not as a chapter, but as a contract that says, because we were once good, I cannot be bad. Because you once loved me, you must forgive me. Because it once felt perfect, you must stay. It clouds your judgment with longing. It makes pain feel like betrayal. And before you know it, you're staying for the ghost of a memory, while the present quietly destroys you. Destiny framing is the manipulation of meaning itself, the reshaping of a relationship, decision, or experience as something meant to be, so that resistance feels like betrayal, not just of the manipulator, but of fate. It's when someone says, we were meant to find each other, or this is bigger than both of us, or don't you feel like this was supposed to happen? It sounds romantic, magical, deep, but beneath the poetry lies pressure, the kind that convinces you your choices are no longer your own. This tactic hijacks your sense of purpose. It makes you feel chosen, aligned with something powerful and rare. And once you accept that frame, you feel obligated to follow the path it dictates. Doubts feel disloyal. Boundaries feel wrong. Pain becomes a test the universe gave you. Red flags are lessons. And leaving? That would mean walking away from your destiny. Destiny framing exploits your need for meaning, your desire for connection that feels cosmic, rare, irreplaceable. And in that vulnerability, the manipulator wraps their presence in inevitability. They're not just a person, they're the person. You're not just compatible, you're soul aligned. And that kind of bond, once framed, becomes nearly impossible to question. Eventually, you stop asking if something feels right. You ask if you're strong enough to endure what was meant to be. And that's the heartbreak of destiny framing. You're no longer fighting for the relationship. You're fighting against the fear that walking away means losing your fate. Emotional debt framing. Emotional debt framing is the manipulation of connection into obligation, the rewriting of kindness, love, and support as currency you now owe. The manipulator does not give freely. They give with invisible strings, and one day those strings tighten into ropes. Every gesture you once felt grateful for becomes a receipt. Every moment of care becomes a future demand. They'll remind you of what they've done. After everything I've put up with, I was there for you when no one else was. I gave you everything. These statements don't come when they're helping you. They come when you resist them, when you assert a boundary, when you say no. That's when the ledger opens, and suddenly your emotions aren't yours anymore. They're debts. This tactic works because it targets your guilt. You remember the late nights they stayed, the sacrifices they claimed to make, the words that once felt like love. But what you didn't see then was that those moments were being stored, banked for later leverage. You didn't know that every "I've got you" would someday become a "you owe me." Over time, emotional debt framing crushes your autonomy. You stop asking for help because it's never free. You suppress your needs so you won't add to the balance. And when you do stand up for yourself, they flip the script. You're ungrateful. You've forgotten. You don't care. But what they never say is the truth. Love isn't a transaction. And the moment they turned your pain into a payment plan, they stopped giving. They started owning. Echoic reframing. Echoic reframing is the manipulation of your own words, reflected back at you, twisted just slightly, and served up as new truth. It's when a manipulator takes something you said, echoes it with a subtle distortion, and reframes it in a way that suits their agenda. They don't argue, they agree, but they reshape. And in doing so, they rewrite your reality while making you feel like it was your idea all along. You say, "I just need more space," and they reply, "Right, because you always push people away when you're scared. You say, "I'm hurt that you didn't show up," and they respond, "Exactly. You have a really hard time with abandonment." What you shared was a boundary, a feeling, a moment of truth, but what they reflect back is a narrative about you, your flaws, your pattern, and you start to question what you meant. You start to doubt what you feel. Echoic reframing is powerful because it uses your voice against you. It disarms you. You think you're being heard, when in reality, you're being redirected. The manipulator doesn't have to deny your experience. They just reinterpret it into something you now feel responsible for, something flawed, something weak, and all of a sudden, the issue isn't what they did, it's how you reacted. Over time, you stop expressing things clearly. You water down your truth. You tiptoe around words they might twist, because you've learned that whatever you say can and will be turned into something else, something that serves them, and slowly erases you. Faux independence empowerment. Faux independence empowerment is the illusion of freedom offered by a manipulator who wants to make you feel in control while carefully engineering your choices to benefit them. It's not real encouragement. It's performative permission, a leash disguised as liberty. They applaud your strength, your boldness, your ability to make your own decisions, as long as those decisions don't threaten their influence. They say things like, "Do what you think is best," or "You don't need me to tell you what to do." But beneath those words lies a loaded silence, a quiet judgment, a subtle withdrawal of support if you choose something they don't agree with. You sense it immediately. Their tone shifts, their energy cools, the message is clear. Independence is celebrated only when it aligns with them. This tactic is devastating because it plays on your desire to be seen as strong and self-governing. You feel empowered, but only within the invisible lines they've drawn. The moment you try to step outside those lines, whether it's making a choice that prioritizes your needs, challenging their influence, or reclaiming your voice, you're met with resistance masked as disappointment. Over time, you start to second-guess your instincts. You keep your ambitions smaller, your voice softer, your steps closer to their shadow. You tell yourself you're free because you choose to stay, when in truth, you've been taught to fear what happens when you don't. Faux independence empowerment doesn't chain you down. It teaches you to build your own cage, and then thank them for letting you decorate it. Silent contempt induction. Silent contempt induction is the coldest kind of emotional abuse. No screaming, no insults, just an ever-present void that makes you feel like a burden for simply existing. It's when a manipulator doesn't need to say they disapprove of you. They show it through withdrawn eyes, pursed lips, the absence of warmth, the way they look through you instead of at you. It's not a fight, it's dismissal, and it hurts more than rage ever could. They don't need to explain what you did wrong. They just exhale slightly when you enter the room. They don't correct you. They just fall silent when you speak. They don't storm out. They remain present, but lifeless, detached, tense. And in that vacuum of validation, you begin to crumble. You scan your memories for missteps. You apologize without knowing why. You start shrinking to avoid whatever invisible line you cross. This tactic is devastating because it mimics shame without words. It punishes you without confrontation. You are not scolded, you're erased. And as you wither under the weight of their cold presence, the silence becomes your accuser, your judge, your cage. They never raise their voice, but somehow you've never felt smaller. Silent contempt induction doesn't aim to fix anything. It aims to control, to make you feel like your emotions are interruptions, your needs are noise, your very presence is too much. And over time, you stop trying to be loved. You just try not to be hated by someone who never had to say a word to make you feel both. Over-apologizing trap. The over-apologizing trap is a manipulation tactic that trains you to take responsibility for everything, your emotions, their reactions, the weather in the room, until "I'm sorry" becomes your reflex, your default, your leash. It begins subtly. They sigh when you speak. They flinch when you express needs. They look disappointed when you ask for more. And though they never say, "It's your fault," they don't have to. They just respond in a way that makes you feel like it is. Soon, you start apologizing for things that don't even require it, for feeling hurt, for needing space, for speaking too loudly or too quietly or at all. And each apology teaches them something. They're winning. Because with every sorry, you give a little piece of your power away. This tactic thrives on guilt and empathy. The more you care, the deeper it cuts. You want harmony. You want peace. But instead of resolving conflict, the manipulator learns to weaponize your need for it. They remain calm, cold, withholding, and you become the one who bends, who breaks, who begs. Over time, you stop expressing altogether, not because you don't have feelings, but because you're tired of apologizing for them. You learn to shrink in advance. You say sorry before you even know what you've done. But here's the cruelest part. They never apologize back, because the over-apologizing trap isn't about resolution. It's about submission. And the more you say sorry, the less they ever have to be.